We might be a small island, but we've got a big history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for clues to our forgotten past.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
Yeah. In 2016, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
It's all happening now.
You little devil, Johan!
Yeah.
In this programme, Digging for Britain showcases the very best of them from the north. Each excavation was filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
Cracking little find. Superb.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can get a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this programme, I'm joining archaeologists in the north of Britain on their quests to discover the lost worlds of our ancestors. In the Outer Hebrides, we dive deep to discover startling Stone Age technology.
Oh my word! I have never seen anything like that.
We join the team tracking down the famous monastery of Lindisfarne, sacked by the Vikings and lost for over 1,000 years.
It's an incredibly exciting thing to be doing. It's hard not to be like a little boy when you finally get the trenches open.
And we are there when an excavation takes a surprising turn to reveal the grisly reality of life in a medieval village.
It must have been a catastrophic event that happened that ended their lives.
I've come to the National Museum of Scotland to see how these discoveries are helping to rewrite the history of Britain. I've been given behind-the-scenes access, so I'll be looking at parts of the collections that are rarely seen by the public. And I'll be getting up close and personal with some of Britain's most remarkable and enigmatic treasures. Our first dig comes from Burnswalk in Dumfriesshire, where some new discoveries are rewriting the history of the Roman conquest. When the Romans invaded Britain, they swiftly conquered most of the southern tribes, but they never conquered all of Scotland. Twice they tried, and twice they failed. But no one's ever found any trace of a major battle. Well, this season, archaeologists think they've got definitive evidence for the first time of a Roman siege in Britain. When the Roman army invaded Britain in 43 AD, Burnswalk Hill was home to a local Iron Age tribe who built a hill fort on its summit. But this hill fort is unique in Britain, because just metres from the summit, it is flanked by two huge Roman army camps, one to the north and one to the south. For decades, it has been believed that these were Roman army training camps. But now archaeologists think that they might be siege camps. If they're right, it would show the Roman war machine in Britain was far better resourced than we'd ever imagined. Andrew Nicholson is the dig director.
We have 2 weeks to excavate here at Burnswalk. We're putting 2 trenches here into the Roman South Camp and 1 trench into the Roman North Camp, and we're looking for evidence of Roman missiles such as lead sling bullets and Roman stone ballista balls.
First, the team start to dig in the South Roman camp. And on day 1, dig coordinator John Reed is there with the camera as they make their first exciting discovery.
Okay, here we are in the south camp and the guys have just shouted me over. So, what have we got? And oh yes, that looks very suspicious. Yeah, perfect.
The first thing we uncover under the turbs is a Roman ballista ball, a local red sandstone ball that would have been launched from a catapult from the Roman camp up towards the hill fort.
We know from evidence across Europe that Roman siege tactics were brutal. This lethal stone missile would have been shot from a catapult or ballista to maim or kill an enemy. It was one of the many powerful siege weapons in their arsenal. After a promising start, for the next 3 days the team dig for more clues. And one small but highly significant find keeps turning up.
Over the last few days, we have managed to secure over 40 Roman sling bullets. These are the very objects that we came here to try and find. Over 40 is quite a significant amount.
These solid lead sling bullets were ammunition for a simple but deadly weapon.
These are propelled from a hand-slung catapult at between 35 and 45 metres per second.
They were fired by specially trained troops called slingers, who could disable the enemy with a fast and furious hail of lead bullets. It's even more evidence that the hill fort was attacked. But if this was a full-scale siege, the team would expect to find more evidence of ammunition in the north camp. But nothing has turned up. Then, on day 4, a metal detector picks up a strong signal. This could be the breakthrough they need.
Okay, here we are round in the north camp now. Hi guys,
Hi there, John.
how's it going?
Well,
Have we found
wanted-
any bullets?
you wanted sling bullets, and we have 1 or 2 for you here.
Oh, fantastic.
In the last count, there was, I think, just over 20.
This is very, very impressive.
But when they dig down further, they find more evidence than they could ever have imagined.
It goes off the scale that there is still a large number of them continuing downwards beyond these stones. At the moment, we've got 169, give or take a few, visible on the surface. It's certainly the largest in situ collection of Roman sling bullets that have ever been found anywhere within the Roman Empire.
The team now has clear and compelling evidence for a highly organised and brutal Roman siege.
The sheer quantity of missile material that they brought to the site is certainly a clue that there was an assault on the fort, and that they are simply using overwhelming force.
We know that from 73 AD, the Romans tried to conquer northern Britain. But until now, we had no idea that they used full-scale siege warfare against the native tribes. I want to know more about how that siege on Burnswalk Hill Fort played out. What was the outcome? So, John, this is just a small portion of that great cache of lemon-shaped slingshots that you found. So they would sit in a sling like this, then?
That's exactly right. And then you would turn it around your head, and then this flips out and it has the same ballistic momentum as a .44 Magnum bullet.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, this is the forgotten firepower of the ancient world.
Yeah. But what are these curious things? They look like pendants almost.
Yeah, they're very exciting because they've never been described before. And the key element of them is they all have a little hole in them.
And it doesn't go all the way through?
Doesn't go all the way through. And I had the theory that they were for poison. And my brother, who knows nothing about archaeology, said, I fish. And when I cast my fishing weights with a hole in it that size, they whistle as they go out. So we made some, we tested them, and they whistle. this is what they sound like. So what they are, we think, is a terror weapon. They make a sound.
Until this dig, we had no idea that the Romans designed bullets like these.
When you imagine, that's just the sound of one.
Yeah.
If you've got 300-400 slingers all going at the one time, that is a lot of noise.
So psychological warfare as well?
Mm-hmm.
These bullets could travel at over 100 miles per hour. To simulate their effect on human flesh, John set up a test using ballistic gel. This is what the Britons at Burnswalk were up against. So you've got what looks like this large cache of ammunition in the camp. Have you found anything on the hill fort itself?
Well, if you look at this, the pink dots represent the spread of bullets across the site. So we can see the position that the shooters are standing in, and we can also see where the recipient target area is along the south face.
This ballistic map clearly shows that the people on Burnswalk Hill were totally surrounded by the Roman army.
So we now have the smoking gun of what took place here.
And what about the little cluster to the north of the hill fort?
This is a group of bullets that we didn't expect. This is the only area that you can escape from the north. And almost certainly a group of people met their end in that position there.
I mean, that's horrendous, because that's not just about driving people out of that hill fort.
No.
That's about a massacre.
That's about a massacre, yeah.
Yeah. The evidence from Burnswalk Hill entirely changes our understanding of the Roman invasion. We had no idea that they'd brought this level of strategic planning and firepower to Britain. So for our ancestors, the consequences of resistance could be devastating. Our next dig takes us to the heart of another British community who also faced adversity over 1,000 years later. The Middle Ages in Britain were a time of unprecedented chaos and turmoil. Lives were blighted by war, famine, and plague. But away from the cities, we know less about how these events affected the lives of ordinary people. Our next site offers us a precious glimpse into the struggles of one rural community during these turbulent times. Thornton Abbey in North Lincolnshire was one of the richest abbeys in medieval Britain. Founded by Augustinian monks in 1139 and dissolved by Henry VIII 400 years later. Archaeologists from the University of Sheffield have been digging here for 5 seasons, building up a detailed picture of how the monks of this wealthy abbey lived. But last year, they began to excavate just outside the abbey walls. It was here that the team made a shocking discovery that would turn the course of the dig from focusing on the lives of the rich to the much more elusive medieval poor.
We were originally looking for a rectangular building, but what we actually found was a rectangular pit that was full of around 40 individuals, all placed in the pit at the same time.
The bodies of 21 adults and 27 children, piled into a mass grave.
It consisted of one fill, suggesting that the bodies were placed there, and then the one thing was backfilled in one event. We assumed because they'd been buried in one event that it must have been a catastrophic event that happened that ended their lives at around the same time.
This part of Lincolnshire has always been rural, so whatever killed this many people must have devastated the local community. To find out what it might have been, I've asked site osteologist Diana Swales to join me in the lab. So Diana, this is a huge number of people all buried in one mass grave. When does it date from?
The radiocarbon dates come back from the 14th century.
And do you have any idea as to the cause of death?
When we excavated them, we had no idea. So our first point of call was to check there was no trauma at the time of death. So we had a good look through and checked that nobody had been massacred. There's no evidence for those kind of activities. So we took DNA samples from the teeth and we sent them off for analysis. And they identified the bacteria Yersinia pestis, which is the bacteria for the Black Death.
The Black Death swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, killing a staggering 50 million people. In Britain, it's estimated that a third of the population died. Incredibly, this is the first plague pit that's ever been found in the British countryside. But what surprised the team most was its location, right outside an abbey. These were ordinary women, men and children, not wealthy monks. So why were they buried here? Then, just metres from the plague victims, they make another unique discovery.
We discovered a long, thin building running on an east-west alignment. And having excavated this, we can now say with some certainty that this was actually a medieval hospital.
So this explains the location of that plague pit. And it's the first time a medieval hospital attached to an abbey has ever been excavated. It could give the team valuable new insights into medieval healthcare.
So we think this hospital was in use from the mid-12th century until the dissolution. That would have consisted of a hospital chapel, which is the area behind me, and the area to the west, which was the dormitory where the inmates would have visited and lived and died.
Experts aren't sure what relationship existed between the wealthy abbeys and the local population. So now Pete wants to find out, who were the people using this hospital? Just a few days later, the team strike it lucky.
So just outside the walls of Hospital Church, on all three sides, we're finding a large number of individuals.
They've found the official burial ground of the hospital patients. This is an extraordinary opportunity to look at the range of diseases that medieval people suffered from.
The lower limb of this old adult male has been amputated just below the knee a long time before they died. This young child is really, really interesting because they have a bulbous, very round head, which looks as though they have hydrocephaly. And the water on the brain is causing the skull to expand. This skeleton here has bowing of the femur, and this looks suspiciously like rickets. This is a malnourished individual.
Over the next week, the team uncovers more victims of malnutrition and disease. We're face to face with the suffering of our ancestors, medieval Britain's rural poor. In the last few days of the dig, the team discovers another burial, this time inside the hospital chapel. But this is not a poor man's grave.
And we've just come down onto this, which is a later medieval graves marker or grave slab. And actually we have the word obit and Ricardus. So it suggests that whoever was buried underneath this originally was named Richard. Gently.
The archaeologists flip it over to try to find more clues about who Richard was.
So we've actually got a date for when this individual died, which is the 2nd of April, and that's in 1317. And obviously we have the individual himself, Richard, and he's in fact holding across his breast a chalice, which would have been his kind of symbol of office. So he's definitely either a canon or a priest.
Underneath the elaborate grave marker, the team finds the human remains of Richard himself. The clues suggest that he was a key figure in this hospital. Back in our lab, I'm hoping that Diana can reveal what his role was. This is Richard,
This
is
is
it?
Richard.
So we have his actual human remains, and we have this image of him as he was in life. So we know that he was bald on top. He's got hair on the side. It's almost like a tonsure. And so, how old was he when he died?
Well, looking at his teeth, they're very worn, which makes me think that he's actually very old.
Gosh, that third molar there, there's hardly any enamel left on it.
Yes.
It's really just the roots, isn't it? So do we presume that he was a priest who was working in that hospital then?
Yes, so he's buried in quite a prestigious location within the chapel. And at this time, there are no doctors at hospitals. It's up to the priests to have a kind of caregiving capacity.
And what about the population that we see buried outside the hospital and the hospital chapel? Because you seem to be seeing quite a lot of children buried there and also a lot of pathology as well.
What it's showing is that we are getting normal lay populations being buried at the hospital. It's most exciting things about Thornton Abbey is that we're seeing an interaction between the normal lay populations and the monastic community.
For looking after them?
Yes, looking after them.
At Thornton Abbey, the archaeologists were surprised to find themselves unearthing the lives of the poor as well as the rich. And then they were amazed to discover such a tangible link between the two that is changing our understanding of medieval healthcare. Archaeology gives us information about ordinary people in a way that the history books simply can't. But when we go back into prehistory, before any written records, archaeology is the only way to understand how people lived. Our next dig takes us back into the Stone Age, where a recent chance find has led to a completely groundbreaking new discovery. This pottery is 5,500 years old. It's Neolithic, but it wasn't discovered during an excavation. Each one of these pieces of pottery was found by divers at the bottom of a loch. And this led the archaeologists to investigate further. What they discovered was truly astonishing. The pottery was discovered on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, in the shallow waters around one of the beautiful islands dotted across Lewis's many lochs. This season, a team of underwater archaeologists set out to solve the mystery of why the pottery was there. What they found is turning our understanding of the Scottish Stone Age upside down.
It's day one in the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis. I'm Duncan Garrow, and this is my friend and colleague Fraser Sturt. Hello, Fraser.
Hello, Duncan.
We're standing by a loch, as you can see, and we've come to investigate 3 islands within 3 different lochs, the first of which is this one.
The team starts their investigation around an island in Loch Arnish.
So the kinds of thing we'll be looking for is, of course, the pots on the bottom of the lochs, but also maybe some other archaeological evidence that gives us richer insights into the kind of lives people were living at that time.
The water here isn't just freezing cold, it's murky. And at first, the divers struggle to see anything. But after a few very cold hours, one of the team does manage to spot something.
I happened to notice amongst the sort of bad visibility a little shape, and it was just this rim that sort of caught my eye, which it didn't look like any of the stones. This is actually 2 pieces prehistoric ceramic.
Pots like this were used for everyday cooking. Could this suggest that 5,000 years ago, a family made this little island their home? It's a tantalising thought because, as far as we knew, Stone Age people didn't live in the middle of lochs. At Loch Langabat to the west of Loch Arnish, the team go looking for more evidence of island life. They're prepared for another long, cold day of underwater hunting. But within just a few hours,
Well done. Oh my word. I'm just going to come and take some video. I have never seen anything like that. That is absolutely amazing.
This beautifully decorated pottery has been underwater for 5,000 years, last touched by its Stone Age owner. And the lock bed is brimming with pottery like this. The archaeologists were right. It looks like these islands were family homes. They hope to find more evidence at Loch Borgastale. It's a full day of diving before they find anything. But when they do, it's incredible.
We've been out snorkeling and looking at the islet out there, and we found some beautiful Neolithic pottery and timbers in situ.
These timbers are crucial. They suggest that Stone Age people weren't just camping on these islands, they were building permanent structures on and around them. And when the dive team look even closer, the full realisation hits them. This whole island has been built by hand.
It's definitely man-made. We can see that it's now stones piled up on a natural rise. Then we've also got split timbers which show that it's been made by people. It's just been amazing. So this is really significant. It's new Neolithic archaeology, so we couldn't be happier.
These lock islands were built by people 5 millennia ago. Duncan and Fraser are now joining me to explain how this discovery changes the story of Britain. So, Duncan and Fraser, this looks like a Neolithic settlement site on an artificial island.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've got, actually. You're right. And they often use the term crannog to describe those, which is basically an island, sometimes artificial, with a building or buildings on it. So,
But crannogs are Iron Age things.
yeah, that's what people have always said all along.
It's amazing, because that pushes them back, well, at least a couple of millennia.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've got a picture of what people think they may have looked like.
Crannogs are famously found in prehistoric Scotland, Ireland and Wales, but until now we believed that they only appeared around 800 BC at the beginning of the Iron Age. This new evidence shows that people were building these sophisticated island homes 2,000 years earlier. Because they're not using natural islands, they're bringing those stones out into the middle of the lake and dropping them there until they've got an island.
There was a calculation done that someone thought it was 1,500 tonnes of rock that you might need to move. So this isn't just we should build a little islet. This is well, you can say a monumental effort. So
what's next? You have to go and look at all the known crannogs, which are presumed to be much later. But do they have earlier origins?
It is quite possible, to be honest. Lots of them might be Neolithic.
It's an overused phrase, but actually the archaeological textbooks are going to have to be rewritten.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This discovery has pushed the invention of Britain's famous crannogs right back into the Stone Age. We knew that people were building houses back then, but we certainly didn't know that they were building whole islands. You can imagine that this would have been a communal effort, and it seems that the Neolithic communities of the Outer Hebrides were well connected, and not only at a local level. Deep in the vaults of the National Museum of Scotland, I've come to see some finds which reveal much wider connections with other parts of the British Isles. That is such an incredibly well-preserved axe. Where was that found?
It was found in Shilishadder, in the north of the island of Lewis, and we radiocarbon dated it. It came out between 3,300 and 3,000 BC.
Fantastic.
But the other thing that's really incredible about it is that the axe head itself is not local at all. It's from County Antrim in the northeast of Ireland.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's travelled all that way?
Absolutely. It's one of several pieces of evidence that tells us that the farming communities in the Hebrides were connected with farming communities elsewhere.
And what about these balls? I mean, they're absolutely wonderful pieces of art, aren't they?
They are superb, and these are very slightly later. But again, they tell us about long-distance contacts. So these 3 are from the Hebrides, these 2 are from Orkney, and then these are from elsewhere in Scotland.
What are they?
Well, many, many hypotheses, but certainly you could have used these as weapons. You could have dealt somebody a pretty good blow on the head if you were to swing it and throw it at them. But I think more importantly, these were weapons of social exclusion. So members of the elite were making long-distance boat journeys as a way of showing off their power. Most people would be just humble farmers, and not everybody would have a boat. But the people who were able to travel long distances, for them, this was a very important prop to their power.
The connection between all of these just demonstrates really vividly the connectedness of the world in the Neolithic.
Absolutely, and the sea plays a very major role in all of this movement of ideas and objects and people. I think we tend to think of the sea as a barrier, but no, in the Neolithic, it was like a superhighway.
Now the discovery of the crannogs of Lewis is starting to allow us to piece together how some of Britain's highly connected Stone Age communities actually lived. In an island nation like ours, people living on the coast have often been at the forefront of innovation and change. Our next dig comes from Lindisfarne Island, off the shores of Northumberland. 1400 years ago, this was the spiritual heartland of Britain. The Anglo-Saxon Monastery at Lindisfarne was a beacon of Christianity in Western Europe and an incredibly important cultural centre. For almost 200 years, Lindisfarne was a driving force in the creation of a new Christian Britain. The monks of Lindisfarne converted the pagan Anglo-Saxon kings to Christianity. And through their contact with the Pictish, Gaelic and Celtic tribes of Britain, they produced some of the finest works of art and scripture in the medieval world, like the Lindisfarne Gospels. This Renaissance is known as the Golden Age. But in 793 AD, this world was annihilated when the Vikings landed on these shores and wiped the monastery from the map. Remarkably, no one knows the precise location of the early monastery. This year, archaeologists went looking for it. Their mission is to find this lost centre of early Christianity.
It's an incredibly exciting thing to be doing. It's a site with such potential, it's hard not to be like a little boy when you finally get the trenches open.
It's a ridiculously exciting place for an archaeologist to dig. It's one of the touch points in the entire Christian tradition.
If they can find the original monastery, then they may also find evidence of the monks who were the masterminds of its golden age. Today, only the ruins of a much later 12th century priory remain.
We're standing in a field to the east of a later medieval priory. We did geophysics here, and we've put our 2 trenches out on areas where we thought we could see possible structures.
For 3 days, the archaeologists scour the trenches for any hint of a building.
A big monastery like this would have had lots of different buildings, churches, workshops, craft areas. And what we're trying to do is potentially try and find some of these structures.
On day 4, it looks like they've made a breakthrough.
In this trench, we were looking for a building, and we do seem to have a broad band of rubble, and it's possible that this might be the foundations for a wooden structure. We certainly know that other monasteries of this date in the north of England often have buildings with similar kind of stone rubble foundations.
These could be some of the first stones laid down by the Anglo-Saxon monks when they built the original monastery 1,400 years ago. But then one of the team spots something mixed in with the rubble.
So we've got a possible cranium.
Well, we're down here. We've come down onto the top of what looks like the top of the cranium, so the top of the skull, and there's other scatters of bone across this whole trench. It does suggest that at some point there must have been a reasonable-sized burial ground in the area.
The team start to wonder if they've found the monastic cemetery. On day 9, they find something hidden in the rubble that could hold a crucial clue to the world of Lindisfarne.
We found a piece of stone which looks like it's possibly got some carving or an inscription on. It's John just giving it a bit of a clean. We're going to see what materialises.
Letters begin to emerge from the mud.
Yes, it's Anglo-Saxon name stone.
Oh wow.
7th, 8th century AD. So that's a cracking little find.
It's superb.
That's good.
It's tremendous.
This is a so-called name stone. It's probably would have acted as a small headstone at the top of a grave. But when you find something like this, which has actually got the name of one of those Anglo-Saxon monks, it's exactly what you hoped you'd find. So he may even have been involved with the creation of the Lindisfarne Gospel. I think a stone like this is pretty much a smoking gun. You must be in a very near vicinity of an Anglo-Saxon monastic cemetery, so it's exactly what we've been after.
Then, with just a few days to go, the team find another key piece of evidence.
You can't just come up here and say these things to me. Where is it?
One of the volunteers over there in Trench 1 has found a small coin. It's almost certainly an Anglo-Saxon silver coin. So again, it's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for.
This coin was minted at the height of Lindisfarne's golden age.
We've had the name stone, now we've got a coin, 1 piece of evidence, 2 pieces of evidence. So I think it's safe to say we've found some really solid evidence of the early monastery here, and it's a really exciting day for our team.
These new finds are of the right date. They do seem to be tantalising traces of that lost Anglo-Saxon monastery. They're a link to the monks who were there at the pinnacle of its golden age. Oh, what extraordinary finds from this first season of digging at Lindisfarne. So, I mean, this is fantastic. This is the headstone you found.
This is the prize find. This is the really distinctive piece of Anglo-Saxon sculpture. You can just about see there's an inscription on here.
Yeah.
It's an Anglo-Saxon name, so it's someone called Ithfrith.
Yeah, I can see the fifth here.
Just see the frith.
Yeah.
And originally this would have been the top of a cross with the terminals here and here.
Yeah. This is fantastic. I mean, we're getting a view of Lindisfarne going right back to, the time when the first monastery was there and those beautiful Gospels were being made.
Yeah, I mean, these things, a person who's remembered on that stone may well have seen the Gospels being made, may well have been involved in creating the Gospels. So we are right at the peak of the golden age of Northumbria with these finds.
And then that golden age disappears. We have a whole sequence of Viking attacks on Lindisfarne and apparently an evacuation of the island. But you're starting to query that as well?
We are. We put another trench in another field and we found this fantastic 10th century comb. But this suggests that perhaps there was a presence, a continued presence in defiance of those Viking threats.
Do you think there's any chance at all that you might find evidence of that Viking attack?
What I think is really interesting is the way that these stones have been broken up and this cemetery has clearly been quite badly mashed around. And is it to do with the Vikings? We don't know, but hopefully we'll be able to find out.
In this first short season, the team unearthed far more than they expected. Next year, they hope to dig deeper to discover more about Lindisfarne's golden age and perhaps the famous Viking attack that destroyed it. Lindisfarne transformed Britain with works of insular art, a unique style which reflected a fusion of different artistic traditions. More than this, insular art can reveal the spiritual beliefs of one individual. One of the finest examples is here in the National Museum of Scotland. Alice, this is a stunningly beautiful brooch. When does this date from?
So this is the Hunterston brooch. It's made some point between the mid-7th, mid-8th centuries AD. It's the biggest, most elaborate brooch that we have from early medieval Scotland, but it's also the flowering, if you like, of an immense mixing of influences in northern Britain at this time.
So it's blending together several different styles then, is it?
Yes, because this form of brooch is found in Scotland and in Ireland, but here it's melded together with Anglo-Saxon interlace and animals.
Now, this cross-like decoration there, do you think that might be a bit of Christianity coming through?
I think it's absolutely some Christian influence. Early Christian art in Scotland and Ireland at this time, it does embed layers of meaning. And although this brooch would be meant to be seen by other people like this, there's quite a different reading of it possible to the person that's wearing it looking down. What we're looking for here is this little filigree beast. Now, this amber inset is its eye.
Right.
We've got two circular insets here, which are the top and the bottom of its open jaw with these hooked teeth biting the cross.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. Before you told me that was there, I couldn't see a creature at all, but now I can see him and I can't stop seeing him.
And these two beasts are confronting either side of this cross. This design derived from a really important early Christian text, and that references the knowing of Christ. So Christ will be known in between two living things.
And as you say, this is facing the wearer. It almost suggests that it's more important that the person wearing it knows about all of this symbolism and that it's a talisman.
Absolutely, yep. We tend to see these brooches as status symbols, as secular objects related to kingship perhaps or power, but in actual fact, they can be deeply Christian as well.
The Hunterston brooch gives us a powerful insight into one person's faith over 1,000 years ago. But when we go even further back in history, before Christianity, it becomes more difficult to decipher what people believed in. The beliefs of our prehistoric ancestors are mysterious. They didn't write anything down, so we're left turning to archaeology for some clues. This season, archaeologists digging on Orkney have found new evidence of very strange rituals involving sacred objects, including human remains. They have been digging on the island of South Ronaldsay to solve the mystery of Scotland's most iconic Iron Age monuments, known as Brochs. The remains of 500 Brochs can still be seen along the Scottish coastline. Once these were remarkable dry stone towers up to 13 metres high, and we believe that they were homes to elite tribal families, defensive forts, and statements of power. But we don't know why most of them were abandoned by the 4th century AD.
Carefully.
Here in Orkney, Martin Carruthers and his team have been investigating one example known as Cairns Broch. They've discovered clues that after abandonment, this Broch served another purpose. This season, they kept us a dig diary.
So day one, Cairns, straight into the thick of the action.
From previous digs, the team knows that the walls of this Broch were deliberately dismantled in the 2nd century, and the stone was piled up inside to create a mound. So now, in their 10th year of excavating, they're ready to remove the rubble from inside the Broch.
Managed to remove a huge amount of rubble from the northern side of the Broch, and now for the first time in possibly 2,000 years, we're getting to look at this northern section of wall, which is particularly beautiful and stunning.
This outer wall was an impressive 5 metres thick. It formed an impenetrable fortress, 22 metres in diameter. The team thinks that the answer to why it was dismantled might lie inside. For 10 days, they scour the Broch floor for anything that might help them to explain it. Then, there's a breakthrough.
So it's day 17 at the cairns, and we're on the outer wall of the Broch, and Carolina has made quite a startling discovery. What have you got there?
A human jaw.
Wow. There's no doubt it's a human jaw, no doubt whatsoever from the shape of it.
Just next to it is something even stranger.
It looks as if that human jaw is closely associated with a very substantial vertebral bone of whale. It's quite a remarkable deposit so far.
The next day, there's more intriguing animal bone.
Lo and behold, they've revealed all this amazing set of red deer antlers that seem to be almost wrapped around the outside of this whalebone.
These strange finds could be a clue as to what was going on here when the Broch was dismantled.
It looks like what happened here is that towards the end of the life of the Broch, they laid out these items as a kind of a decommissioning deposit, an act of closure at the end of the Broch.
I've asked Martin to join me in the lab to explain what purpose these dismantled fortresses might have had and how these objects might have been used as part of an ancient ritual. Well, Martin, what a fantastic season at Cairns Broch. And these really are astonishing finds. This whalebone here, this is fascinating.
It is
and
indeed.
Someone has hollowed it out to convert that into a vessel. And then next to it are these antlers, which you can see really nicely here.
They've been propped against the outer side of the whalebone vessel.
And this is the mandible then that was there with this whalebone vessel and the two antlers.
Yep.
And you've just got the remains of the holes for the roots of the incisors here. So you're looking at an old person here.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating because one of the hypotheses we have is that perhaps this is a fragment of someone that's been curated and held onto for a longish period of time, maybe even centuries, akin to the kind of saintly relics that are kept for a long time in the medieval period. The fact that this is an elderly person is interesting because they presumably had a biography and they were a well-known, maybe even renowned individual.
This jawbone could have belonged to one of the Iron Age elite of Cairns Broch, whose remains were used in this strange ritual. But are you seeing this as specifically, I don't know, part of funerary ritual here then?
I don't think the presence of this individual is actually recognising their death. This is the use of a dead person in ritual paraphernalia. And at the right moment in time, at the end of the Broch, that's when this piece of this individual is then put back into the ground as part of that deposit. So effectively, they're turning what had been a freestanding, upstanding, massive, substantial house for generations, and they're turning it into a mound, literally an ancestral pile.
Martin is at last beginning to unravel the mystery of why at least one of Scotland's famous Brochs was dismantled. And his strange finds from this season suggest that the Broch remained at the heart of the community, becoming transformed into a sacred site. The excavation at Cairns Broch is still turning up amazing finds after a decade of digging. But sometimes it's one extraordinary find that triggers a huge new excavation. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic warriors who in the 5th century AD invaded Britain, bringing us our language and our laws and setting up the first kingdoms in what would become England. But there are few historical records from this time, and archaeological evidence is also thin on the ground. But this year, a serendipitous discovery revealed a forgotten part of the Anglo-Saxon story. In 2011, in the small village of Little Carlton in Lincolnshire, local builder Graham Vickers was metal detecting in a barley field when he discovered some extraordinary objects.
And most of the things I found have been found in this area over here. And this is pins, brooches, styli like that one. I found over 20 of these.
Graham had stumbled across something incredibly rare. Prestigious objects and writing tools belonging to the literate Anglo-Saxon elite. So why were they turning up here in this empty field? These finds were so rare, a team of archaeologists from the University of Sheffield launched an investigation. They were intrigued because there had never been any evidence for the Anglo-Saxons in this part of Lincolnshire. Very quickly, dig director Hugh Wilmot and his team uncover a big settlement, a goldmine of new information about how these mysterious Anglo-Saxons lived.
This is the Little Carlton Dig Diary for our excavations in 2016. We've just finished machining off the plough zone, and the archaeological features are already popping through.
Now Hugh wants to find out what kind of settlement this was. After just a few days of digging, the team get their first clue.
Well, we've been finding lots of really exciting things. This is a pair of tweezers that's been metal detected, and this is a pair of tweezers that was found yesterday. I mean, they could be for cosmetic purposes, but it has been suggested that possibly these might have served other functions, such as for turning parchment pages in a book.
In Anglo-Saxon England, Christian monks were usually the only people who could read and write. So for Hugh, this is a big clue that this could be a forgotten monastery. But on day 8, the team finds something that tells them that this was more than just a place of prayer.
Really, it's rather hard to see, but it's a bit of a glass vessel. It's definitely Saxon, and it's a sort of globular beaker, and that's really rather nice find, actually, Sam. Yeah, that's good. This is the kind of artefact that you wouldn't expect to find on an ordinary site. This is a high-status drinking vessel. It's probably continental import. Very nice.
This shows that the people who lived here were wealthy and trading with the continent. But another find reveals something even more surprising.
One of the most unique artefacts we've got is this iron manacle. It has a barrel lock here and a hinged loop here, and this would have gone around the leg of some captive or possibly a slave. Slavery was, widespread practice in early medieval Europe, and this again suggests high status trade in individuals, perhaps. But again, this is a pretty much unique find. I don't think there's been another one found on a British site.
This is a remarkable find. So far, the evidence suggests that this site could have been a monastery, an upper-class settlement, and a trading centre. Then, the dig takes an even more unexpected turn.
My pleasure. So now, 2 weeks into the excavation, we're actually coming face to face with the Anglo-Saxons themselves. This part of the site where we're digging is actually the location of one of the Anglo-Saxon cemeteries.
All these people seem to be buried in a Christian style, laid out on their backs and aligned east to west. But on day 18, the team uncovers an individual that's unlike all the others and shows some signs of strange burial rites.
It's our penultimate day here at Little Carlton, and we're just finishing up the excavation. And one of the things we've been doing is excavating this skeleton here, and it's probably the most exciting thing that we've found so far. Now, what makes this a really interesting burial is the fact that they've been buried on their front. But there's something else that really makes this special, and it's when you see how narrow the body is in the grave. These are the two shoulders, and there's about 25 centimetres between them, so they're really crunched together.
It's a bizarre burial for a Christian person. But what more can it tell us about this Anglo-Saxon settlement? So Hugh, these are the bones that we saw being uncovered right at the end of that video. So looking at this skeleton in the grave then, this is somebody buried face down and very narrow.
Yes, absolutely. This one's clearly been bound in a shroud or something like that. Very, very tight.
And then there's something odd going on with these
Well, I hope
with
you can
these
tell
legs.
me about this, because...
Because here we're looking at the back surface of a femur, and then you come down to here, and there's a kneecap. Now, you haven't got kneecaps on the back of your knee, so this suggests that these legs have come apart at the knee and then have been put back together, but twisted 180 degrees.
Wow.
So I think what we can say for definite is that it was buried in the ground after the body had started to decompose, that the limbs have started to fall away from the rest of the body. But then, you know, great care actually has been taken to try to put the limbs back.
Absolutely. Well, a great deal of care has been taken over this burial. So this could be an individual who perhaps has died away from the site and has been brought back to be interred here specifically.
Because there are stories about the bodies of kings, for instance, being moved.
And of course, saints and holy people. So, you know, there could be something like that going on here.
This special burial, then, suggests Little Carlton may have been a settlement of great importance, and it was perhaps the resting place of an Anglo-Saxon king or saint. So what you found, then, is a lost Anglo-Saxon settlement?
Absolutely.
And possibly monastery?
No one knew it was there before, and it certainly looks a good contender for a possible early monastery.
You're really redrawing the map, archaeologically. Nobody knew this was there. Little Carlton is so packed with information that Hugh and his team expect to be digging here for many years. At the moment, the finds are intriguing but hard to decipher. But the more that they uncover, the more they will be able to untangle the story of how the Anglo-Saxons staged their occupation and laid the foundations for the first kingdoms of England. This year's finds in the north have changed the story of Britain. From what it was really like to face the might of Rome, to the forgotten Stone Age inventors of Scotland's famous crannogs.
Oh, Dan! That is absolutely amazing.
And the lost rituals of our ancient ancestors.
There's no doubt it's a human jaw, no doubt whatsoever.
Through archaeology, we've been able to reach out across the centuries and touch our ancestors' lives. Hello and welcome to Digging for Britain, the programme which brings you this year's most exciting new archaeology. In this show, we'll be looking at highlights from all the digs, we'll get some in-depth analysis, and we'll be looking at treasures from the past. Once again, over the last year, archaeologists have been unearthing our history in hundreds of digs across Britain.
Go on! Fantastic. It's a 2.
They've gone to extraordinary lengths to uncover secrets from the past, retelling our story in a way that only archaeology can.
It's in perfect mint condition.
Amazing.
Well done.
I was right!
And our archaeologists have been out filming themselves, so we have been there for every single moment of discovery. And then we're coming back here to Norwich Museum and seeing if we can really make sense of the new discoveries.
In this series, we'll be touring the country, and tonight, we're in the southeast. First, we hear about incredible finds at a Bronze Age Pompeii in the Fens. We unearth an amazing hoard hidden in desperation as Queen Boudicca's tribe hunted down the Romans. And we discover weird burial rituals, revealing the secrets of Anglo-Saxon motherhood and childbirth.
Norwich Castle Museum, originally a Norman fortress, is now home to the archaeological riches of the South East. Norfolk is the treasure capital of England, and each year 20,000 finds are reported to the museum, more than in any other county. Finds like the Happisburgh axe. Dating to 500,000 years ago, it comes from what's become one of the most important prehistoric sites in Britain. And the Stonehenge Hoard, the richest Iron Age treasure ever found in this country. Our first story takes us 70 miles away from Norwich, right into the heart of the Fenlands.
Must Farm in Cambridgeshire is being called the Pompeii of the Bronze Age. Preserved in the wetlands of the Fens, this site is giving us an unparalleled glimpse of prehistoric life, going back over 3,000 years.
In the past, archaeologists have uncovered ancient causeways running through the Fenland Basin, making them think that Bronze Age people saw this watery landscape as a sacred place, only visiting it on special occasions. But now, on the edge of a quarry, they're finding evidence of industrialised fishing, opening up a whole new perception of life in the Fens. It's something never seen before, and more importantly, they believe it could stretch for miles. This is archaeology on a massive scale. Mark Knight from the Cambridge Archeological Unit has been analysing some of the most recent finds from a lost side channel of the River Nene.
Often we dig sites of the sort of Bronze Age in this region and we find one vertebra and we say that that's evidence for fish in the diet, or we say that maybe it's a chance find. But we're just finding lots and lots of fish, and we're finding things like pike and perch and carp and smelt. And then when we went to excavate the channel properly, we then found about 20 really beautifully preserved sort of sock-shaped baskets that are definitely fish traps. But alongside those, we're finding these sort of chevron-shaped wattle fences, forming these weirs across the length of the channel, regularly spaced along the entire area of the channel that we excavated. And there's a real sense here of an industry, perhaps, rather than maybe something sort of ad hoc and stuff. And remember, we've dug 300 metres, and we're looking at a channel that we can trace for at least 10 kilometres. If it's typical, then, you know, we're talking about hundreds of weirs and thousands of fish traps being set within its course.
Mark, what an extraordinary site. I mean, the preservation there is beautiful.
It's stunning, yes. It's one of those sites where you don't have to do a lot of sort of describing to visitors and things. They can see for themselves just what's there.
And it seems that fishing was going on an almost industrial scale then.
It's a surprise, I suppose, because we don't normally find fish bones in the faunal assemblages, so there we are finding weirs and traps everywhere.
So we know where these people were working. There must have been tens, hundreds of people possibly working in this industry. So where did they all live?
It's a really good question, and it's my opinion that basically they're living in the fens, they're living on the peat, they're living on the rivers, and we've got good evidence of that, and the sense that it corresponds to a phase within the dryland sites where there is no settlement. So it's as if they're colonising the wet, basically, and the traps and the weirs are part of that new landscape.
I think we've got some more from this incredible site.
As the team continued their excavations in the side channel of the Nene, they started to find metalwork.
So we dig 300 metres of channel and we come up with a whole host of swords, spears and metal objects.
Finds like these are rare, but some have been found on other Bronze Age sites, leading to theories that they were ritual offerings for watery deities. But Mark believes the weapons recovered at Must Farm had a more practical use.
The sheer quantity of swords and spears in the sort of sense that this is a landscape that appears to be sort of newly colonised. We're starting to think that maybe the metalwork being found in the wet places was actually an indication of just the scale of occupation of the wet spaces themselves. So they were living on the rivers, or they were living on the marshlands themselves.
Some of these swords also have nicks on the sides of the blades, signs of violence.
Swords like this were used to sort of slash things, and the idea was that if you were hitting someone, you'd get sort of marks on here, but if you were defending, then you'd get marks down here. And we've found swords with those consistent signatures of conflict, I suppose, of them being used in anger rather than just being sort of symbolic objects. You arrived being prepared to protect yourself at the very least, or maybe even upset people that were already in that landscape.
So, Mark, you think these really were weapons, they're not just symbols?
I just find it impossible to think that all those swords and all those spears were just purely there for show, basically.
So it seems like quite an idyllic environment, but perhaps not as idyllic as all that.
Yeah, I suppose like any landscape that we occupy as human beings, there is this sort of, I don't know, tendency to sort of want to hang on to what you've got, basically. And you get a real sense within Finland that there is a territory, the idea that this is our place.
So do you think this really was Bronze Age prime real estate then?
I get the feeling that basically this is the place to be, and essentially that the sort of switch has come from Stonehenge over to the main rivers of eastern England.
Right, we've got some more from your amazing site.
The River Nene is an extensive wetland which was first created 4,000 years ago when sea levels rose. But the people of Bronze Age Britain took this climate change in their stride. In fact, they flourished here. Evidence of this resourcefulness is backed up by a significant discovery. Not one, not two, but 8 log boats. And unusually, virtually intact. The boats have been moved to Flag Fen and are now being conserved using the same methods that helped save the Mary Rose.
There's a real sense here that we're seeing the vessels of transport, of movement, maybe of fishing, but also about the actual occupation and the settlement of Deep Fen. The first time we actually step off dry land and get into the deep sediment, we find 8 log boats in 300 metres of channel. So either, we found the one spot in the whole of Finland, or this is representative of the rest of that landscape. And if it is representative of the rest of the landscape, then the scale was astonishing. And the sense that there are thousands of these boats up and down those channels and river courses, and they represent that sense of mass settlement of that wetland.
We often think that climate change always has a negative impact and that the wetlands would have been an inhospitable environment for humans, but Mark has other ideas.
What we're suggesting from our evidence is it was the opposite of that. It was no longer an impediment to settlement, and nor was it something that sort of made you retreat. It was actually a landscape that you were quite keen to inhabit. And the people had the imagination to find ways of getting into that space. And they maintained that link to the channel as well, as in the English Channel and the continent, and I think that's really important.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, those are quite big boats that you're finding there.
Yeah, one's 9 metres in length, so.
And why do you think they're at the bottom of the river? Is it anything to do with the swords and the other depositions?
You've got to remember there's 1,500 years of history in that channel, and there are boats throughout the sediment. So it's not necessarily the same story for each of the boats, but some of the boats are pristine, and they seem to have a connection with the weaponry. And it's quite often in the fens that you find boats close to swords or spears. So there seems to be a connection there. And at the same time, there are fragments of human skeletons within the channel as well. So if we wanted, we could form a sort of triangle here of swords, boats, and bodies, and we can start maybe thinking about an association with maybe burial or something like that.
This is fascinating because when I think about Bronze Age burials, I think about kist burials, stone-lined, crouched burials.
Yeah,
I don't think of people having burials in water in their
but
boats.
I think. Remember, this is the later Bronze Age, and if we try and find the burial record for that period, we can't. It's conspicuous by its absence, and I like that idea that we're not the first people to suggest that people were being buried in rivers. The Thames is famous for its Bronze Age skulls and things like that, and the association with swords and things. Maybe some of those boats, their pristineness is the fact that they had a body attached to a sword in its scabbard and things, and it was sunk in that river and things. So these are the possibilities that we're coming across.
So you're pushing archaeological boundaries as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think you feel like we're on a slope to the bottom of the North Sea, and on the way down there we're going to explore the whole of the British prehistory, and I think that's the excitement about it.
Must Farm, with its amazing wealth of finds, is the perfect example of how new archaeological discoveries can completely change our ideas about the past. And while Bronze Age people rose to the challenge of the fenlands, creating a highly productive fishing industry, it seems that they were also respecting the watery landscape with ritual offerings of swords to the gods. Like this stunning Bronze Age dirk or long dagger back here in the museum.
So Tim, what have you brought in for us today?
What I really want to show you is something that the museum has just acquired and is an absolute star object for showing you something like ritual from the Middle Bronze Age.
Incredible, it's huge. And that's the blade along there, is it, that edge?
It is. It's the blade edge, but it's one that's never been sharpened. So it's deliberately made, but not with the intention of ever using as a weapon. And the same goes for the hilt here. It's never actually been hafted on.
Why is it so large?
Well, it is because it's purely for ceremony. We don't quite understand why, but it's one of only 6 in Europe. There are 2 from England, 2 from France, and 2 from Holland that are now known. Something that suggests there's a North Sea trade link, perhaps.
So it's real proof that in the Bronze Age there really was a proper organised trade network across Europe.
Absolutely. But the interesting thing about this is, in being the second from England, both of them are from Norfolk.
I mean, it looks like a very sturdy object. How come it's been bent?
Well, we often find with Bronze Age weapons that they seem to be bent or deliberately destroyed before they're placed in the ground, and that seems to be part of the ritual killing of the object itself. So again, it's putting it out of commission, and again, it's part of, presumably, the ritual involved in why you have them in the first place.
And just 50 miles from our museum, Colchester was once the beating heart of Roman Britain, until an uprising led by a British warrior queen.
In various eras, Boudicca has been described by historians as a bloodthirsty savage, a freedom fighter, and even a feminist icon. But it's archaeology that's revealed the harsh realities of the Boudiccan Revolt.
In AD 61, Colchester was the first town to feel the full wrath of the Queen and her Iceni tribe. Archaeologists digging behind a Fenwick store in the town centre are unearthing a story of one Roman woman whose house was burned down in the fighting.
It's quite amazing when you stand in the excavation and you could almost feel you're standing in the burnt-out remains of her house, because the floors are all scorched red and black, and the walls are all reddened, big lumps of clay block wall lying on the floors.
The team are trying to trace the last moments of this house and its owner. Back at the Colchester Archeological Trust, Project Officer Adam Whiteman's taken up the trail.
This is the remains of charred foodstuffs. We found 1 or 2 wooden planks, which either come from some shelves or a table, and spread over the top of those were foodstuffs that have been preserved as they've been carbonised. Here we have, these are burnt figs. You can see all the little seeds in those. These are burnt dates. And this selection here has been hand-picked out of this soil sample. And these are a selection of peas and small wheat grains and possibly some various other sorts of legumes.
Were these blackened foodstuffs the interrupted last meal prepared by the lady of the house?
Very touching to see it lying there, scattered, blackened on the floor.
And just outside the incinerated home, what appears to be evidence of a violent death.
These were discovered actually on the edge of a Roman street. These two bones appear to exhibit injuries. This mandible here is missing a slice of bone there, and this tibia is also missing a piece there. The cuts appear to be quite clean, look like they've been done by a sharp blow. They're sort of more comparable to a butchery mark on an animal bone rather than the mark of a shovel or a spade from the clearance of the building. So chances are these bones actually tell us even more of a gruesome tale than just having been spread on the side of the road.
Behind all this violence was Boudica. Originally, she was an ally of the Roman invaders, but they annexed her lands, flogged her, and raped her daughters. In 61 AD, a revolt swept across the east. The Romans who weren't murdered fled for their lives. The team believes that this house was right in the path of the rebels and that the woman who lived here hid something before she left.
What we found in this excavation was the extraordinary discovery of this desperation act. This well-off lady had taken all her precious jewellery and buried it in this tiny little hole, just big enough for her to stuff it all in and cover it, in the hope, I suppose, that she was going to be able to go back and recover it after the big emergency was over. But of course that never happened.
Carefully unpicked in the lab, the jewellery, now known as the Fenwick Hoard, had lain hidden from the Iceni, and for almost 2,000 years after that. Earrings, armlets, chains, and rings. One woman's treasures. A poignant memento. But history suggests a grim fate for the owner of this hoard.
Dio Cassius is the one that tells us what happened in Colchester to the women. The noblest, for which we can read the richest, and that would be this lady surely, were rounded up and taken to sacred groves, groves which were dedicated to the British goddess of victory, and there they were horribly sacrificed.
They hung up naked the noblest and most distinguished women, and then cut off their breasts and sewed them to their mouths, in order to make the victims appear to be eating them. Afterwards, they impaled the women on sharp skewers run lengthwise through the entire body.
Tim, that sounds horrendous, but this could just be Roman propaganda. But the archaeology is telling us something unequivocal, that there was a revolt here.
The archaeology is certainly telling us that there's a destruction layer that occurred at exactly the time that it's documented that the revolt took place. And so it's not unreasonable to assume that that destruction layer is associated with the documented historical revolt. That's right.
Why have you brought these particular artefacts?
This is exactly the reason. If we look at these, they're two very interesting artefacts, one of which is from the Castle Museum, and it's a fragment of a horse statue. And the head here is on loan to us from Colchester and Ipswich museums. And it's actually a copy of a head that's the original of which is now in the British Museum. And it's the head of Claudius, the emperor who undertook the invasion of Britain. And they seem to be from the same statue of the Emperor Claudius, an equestrian statue.
Were they found in the same place?
They weren't. The head was found in the River Ald, at Rendham in Suffolk in 1907 by a boy splashing around in the river.
Right.
And the part of the horse was found by a metal detectorist in Norfolk in 1979. So 37 miles apart.
So how can you tell they're from the same statue then?
Well, that's a good question. We can't be absolutely sure, but metal analysis shows that there's a very low lead content in both of the bronzes, and it suggests that they are one and the same. It should also be added that there are no other fragments of statue like this in East Anglia, so they're a rare bird to start with.
So do you think the statue had been deliberately destroyed then and smashed up after the Boudiccan Revolt?
Almost certainly. The head has been wrenched off, and the leg also seems to have been torn up. And I think it's interesting that they haven't been melted down and reused. They've actually been deposited. And with the head in the river, it could easily be something like a sacrificial offering to a river.
What happened after the revolt?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't have a very happy ending for the Icenian people, because after burning Colchester, going on to London and Verulamium, they're defeated in the West Midlands and Roman rule is imposed. And in particular, it's probably imposed very severely in East Anglia, which were considered very dangerous and rebellious areas.
From the story of treasure hidden by one desperate woman swept up in a bloody revolt, we move to a dig in Oakington that gives us amazing insight into the place of women in Anglo-Saxon society.
Even today, childbirth can be a risky and worrying time, but it was far riskier for our ancestors. A team from the University of Central Lancashire has spent the last 5 years investigating life and death in an Anglo-Saxon community. They returned this year and made some truly remarkable discoveries. Here's their dig diary.
So we are in Oakington, and this is the 2014 excavation. This is our main trench. We have a significant early Anglo-Saxon cemetery, which includes 124 graves. They date pretty much to the 6th century AD.
But what's unusual about this cemetery is the number of infant burials.
We appear to have little clusters of infants' graves around the edges of the site. And we found something earlier on this week that I think demonstrates that very nicely. These are fragments of an infant's legs and skull. Out of our population of 124 individuals, about 30% are infants. This is extraordinarily high, so it's really interesting to have that, and we had to start questioning why.
What's also unusual about this site is that the team has been finding a large number of high-status female burials.
In this space here, in 2011, we excavated grave 57. This is an adult woman, and one of the first ones that we found that year. She was a wealthy burial, buried with a large cruciform brooch at her neck, 2 smaller ones at her shoulders, and a full set of beads and purse. What was really interesting about her is that in her pelvic area, we found a whole series of very, very small bones. And it turns out that these were an infant. She was pregnant when she was buried, and this was probably the cause of death. A really tragic story, but a very interesting piece of the puzzle.
A surprising find. But this was only the tip of the iceberg for Duncan and his team.
In 2012, we had a large trench just where I'm standing now, and excavating just here, we found a woman buried with a complete cow. Now that's a completely unique find. We haven't found anything like that in the whole of northwestern Europe for the 6th century AD. It's really interesting because the cow has cut marks across its lower feet, which suggests that it was skinned. It also had no tailbones at all. So this is not a romantic bovine burial with a furry, cosy animal in their pet, but rather it's a sacrificial offering, a meat gift placed in the grave so that she could host parties in the next world.
Wow, what an incredible find. What did you make of that, Duncan?
It was incredible. We didn't expect it at all. We got very excited because you don't find large animals with women. And I don't know of another example in England. I don't know of another example from the early Middle Ages in Europe at all. So it's unique at this point.
So how does that burial there fit in with all the other female burials that you have in the cemetery?
OK, so that one is mid-6th century. And it's probably got a little mound over the top of it and a whole load of burials all the way around it. And it becomes a central focus point. And we have a number of other similar burials like that, without the cow, of quite important female burials which seem to be focal points throughout the cemetery. And so it's a succession of important women that were part of that 6th century community at Oakington.
So what did you find this year? Let's take a look.
This is an adult female. You can tell from the shape of the pelvis here, but also from the skull shape as well. What's sort of interesting about this one is that this yellow pipe here has been drilled through the grave from a different position, and the people that put it here never saw it. This is part of the services for Oakington Village, as we're right up against the road. So this is often where lots and lots of services go through. And it's amazingly lucky that when they put this through, they missed all of the objects that she's been buried with, and did very little damage really to the skeleton. They really couldn't have done that better, even if it was completely accidental.
What's even more intriguing about this grave are the objects buried with the woman. She seems to be of high status.
We have here a small long brooch that would have been worn on her shoulder, and there's another one on her shoulder just here to hold up her dress. And then this large one would have been on a large cloak, and this is face down. So it would have almost certainly have been wrapped up in the cloak and then rolled on the top of the burial. So it's really interesting that the positions of the objects there can tell us how she was dressed. And almost certainly she was wrapped up in a cloak before the soil was placed in the grave.
So what you've got is an Anglo-Saxon cemetery with a large proportion of women, and a large proportion of women who appear to be very high status, and a lot of infants as well, compared with other cemeteries. What's going on?
That's right. So, proportionally, we have almost all of our female burials are furnished, whereas only a small handful of our male burials are furnished. So they are signifying, or they're making a point of the female burials much more than they are the male burials.
Meaning that all the females were buried with combs, beads...
Exactly, and the brooches on the shoulders and at the neck there as well. But then with all those infants buried in groups around the female burials or on the edge of the cemetery, that population is too high. And so what we're thinking at the moment is that we have a female-dominated matriarchal group, and their daughters are going out and marrying other communities. But potentially, that's quite a scary thing. You're going to a new place, a masculine place, and it's a bit scary to give birth. So they're maybe travelling back, and they're bringing their children back to their mother's hall, to their sister's hall, and they're giving birth there. Now, I don't know whether we can see that archaeologically, but certainly what we can see is those connections, those relationships, and that's why this is a central place in the Cambridgeshire landscape.
So cemeteries like this are not just telling us about individuals, they're giving us information about the structure of society at the time.
Absolutely. The structure of society, its organisation, the movement of people across quite wide areas as well. We're not talking about walking around the corner, we're talking about travelling for some miles to come to this community for this sort of activity.
And the first cow in an Anglo-Saxon grave.
And have you finished the cemetery now, is that it?
We've excavated as much as we possibly can. Yep, so that's the end now excavation. All of it is now post-excavation, and we hope to understand more and really question some of these things in much more detail.
To get a sense of the wealth and high status of these Anglo-Saxon women, there's no place better than Norwich Castle Museum. It's a treasure trove of bronze, silver and gold. Like this Anglo-Saxon bracteate or pendant.
The particularly important thing about bracteates is that when they've been found in Britain, they've only been found in female graves or as single stray finds. But The particular focus of this is as a hoard. It's the first time this has ever been seen in Britain, whereas normally in Scandinavia, where these bracteates are typically found, they're buried in hoards.
I mean, the workmanship on these is absolutely incredible. But what do these show us?
Well, bracteates are ultimately derived from coin designs, Roman coin designs, because coins would have been worn as pendants themselves. And ultimately, the design became copied, and the copy became copied, and so on, until you end up with a very basic design. And on this bracteate, you can see a warrior with a sword raised behind his back, fighting off two animals.
So what kind of women would have worn these bracteates? I mean, they're solid gold. They look pretty expensive to me.
They are expensive, and therefore it's a sign that the person wearing them is of high status themselves. And from another point of view, it also says something about the person or people that were able to bury an entire hoard of these in the ground to give them up and not come back for them.
This summer, archaeologists have been digging in Kent, looking at what they suspect is a royal palace complex, just the sort of place where people would have been wearing all of that Anglo-Saxon finery.
Lindisfarne in southern Kent is now a peaceful English village. But in Anglo-Saxon times, this was a bustling royal centre. For the last 3 years, right in the heart of the village green, dig director Gabor Thomas and his team have uncovered evidence of medieval life and Bronze Age burials, but what they really want are signs of Anglo-Saxon royalty.
Right, it's a lovely rim fragment.
And they're beginning to find clues to personal wealth and status.
So this is a bit of metalwork that came up yesterday. It's a small piece of copper alloy, and it's in the shape of a bird. It's decorated on both sides, which is quite interesting. This is just a hint of what's likely to come once we start excavating into the features.
I thought it was modern, and then I was like, no, wait, what? Yeah.
I don't think we've ever had that's so recognisable like that.
So we don't get a lot of bases at all of glass. It's a quite large fragment anyway for a piece of glass. We usually get rims and bits of the body, but not the bases, really.
The team believes these glass fragments were once part of elaborate drinking vessels, like these replicas. But more importantly, they were used by high-status Anglo-Saxons, possibly even Kentish kings. And what they're uncovering now could be the proof they need that kings were here.
We've had a really good breakthrough today in this particular trench where we're looking at an exposure of around about 20 metres. So this building's about probably in excess of 20 metres in length. And we've also got a width for it, somewhere around 10 metres in width. That's a super-sized hall for the Anglo-Saxon period. You only get these scale halls on royal palace complexes.
So, Gabor, you really think you have found an Anglo-Saxon royal hall?
Without doubt. I mean, the structural evidence says that very clearly. You only get buildings on this scale, on this type of site, and it's worth saying that this is incredibly rare archaeology. Only 2 other sites of this period and this importance have previously been excavated, including the iconic site of Yevering in Northumbria. It was the first place that open-area excavations were undertaken in the 1950s. But normally these sites are found through aerial photography. They show up as crop marks. But on this site, it didn't even show up on geophysics. It required really open-area excavation from the start and really some small clues that there might be something of this magnitude just under the village green.
So what were the clues that made you dig there?
Well, there was a documentary reference that describes Lindisfarne as a royal ville or a royal complex, but none of the archaeology relating to that earlier period have ever been found before. And that's what we hoped we would find under the village green, and we hit the jackpot. It was amazing.
And as well as this amazing royal hall, you found an extraordinary rubbish dump.
right next to the 7th century Royal Hall, the team opened up another area after geophys revealed a mysterious blob. This turned out to be a midden or rubbish dump with incredibly rare finds deep within it. Archaeologist Alex Knox explains.
Today we have begun excavating what we call the Dark Blob in Trench 1, which is full of Anglo-Saxon artefacts. And we're also hoping to find out if there's anything lying underneath this dump of rubbish.
As the team dig into the midden, high-status finds start coming thick and fast. They uncover decorative brooches.
Yeah, it's in perfect mint condition.
Amazing.
Well done.
Bronze hairpins.
It's an absolute monster. Is that the end? That is the point, yeah.
And a copper alloy mount.
Probably would have been attached to perhaps a leather belt around the second half of the 6th century.
These Anglo-Saxon fashion accessories predate the Royal Hall by a full century. A very early insight into the culture of this settlement. But the next finds begin to reveal something quite different.
I've seen metalworking residues, iron tools and implements.
It looks relatively modern, actually.
It does.
Probably isn't that modern at all.
And as the metal finds grow, the team begins to suspect there's more to this dump than meets the eye. So they dig a trench right through the middle to investigate.
What's appeared at this level very clearly for us is an area of burning, or what archaeologists would call a hearth. We've also got consolidated lumps of what's likely to be the superstructure or the dome over a furnace or a kiln, showing up nicely on this side of the trench. This evidence here fits very nicely with the materials that have been dumped in above this level. We've recovered a lot of smelting slag, so we have an early Anglo-Saxon version, if you like, of a metalworking installation, of which we've only got one other example really from Anglo-Saxon England, which is 2 centuries later. So this is hugely significant archaeology. Now we've got to try and refine our understanding of what's going on in here a bit better by the end of the season.
So, Gabor, this is some of the earliest evidence we have for metalworking then in Anglo-Saxon Britain.
That's right, and there's different types of metalworking as well. So we've got ironworking represented, but also in front of us here is a selection of objects associated with bronze casting. We've got a fragment of a 2-piece mould just here.
What object do you think that would have been?
Probably a piece of jewellery. It may have been something like a bronze buckle, or perhaps even a brooch.
So they were really churning out this really high-status bling jewellery, if you like, here.
That's right.
But that's not all you had from the midden, is it, really? Alex, what have you got over there?
We're just washing some of the animal bone that's come out of the midden. Just endless amounts of feasting debris, cattle, sheep, pig, enormous amounts of animal bone to go along with all this metalworking.
So you've got these myriad finds from the midden. What does it all mean?
Well, we have a really interesting association here between feasting on the one hand, as represented by our animal bone, and all of our glass vessels. I think what this represents is a period when specialised manufacture of high-status objects is happening within the sphere of elite residences. And we haven't previously seen that on other sites. This is very new.
So it's really adding as well to our knowledge of the whole of Anglo-Saxon Britain, really?
Absolutely. It's telling us what elite culture was like in this period and its intimate relationship with the production of luxury items.
So once again, archaeology reveals an unexpected twist. A beautiful royal residence, and right next door, making their very own luxury goods, a very early Anglo-Saxon factory. Next, we head to Basing House, a place synonymous with battle and bloodshed.
Basing House in Hampshire was a key site in the Civil War. It was a royalist stronghold, and the parliamentarians were keen to take it.
And this year, archaeologists have been digging up evidence of the house's bloody history, bringing us face to face with one of English history's most controversial characters.
In the 16th century, Basing House was one of the most impressive Tudor complexes in the country. It was built on a Norman fort, known as the Old House. And right next to it used to sit a huge mansion, known as the New House. This is where the team have put in a large trench.
It's actually a fantastic archaeological site to work on. We took off the topsoil and the walls started to emerge almost immediately.
Documents of the time tell of a final battle that took place here in 1645, and the team are looking for hard evidence as to just how this mighty fortress fell. Heading up the dig is Chris Elmer.
So we're midway through the dig and we're finding quite a lot of evidence now of the Tudor range that lies behind us. And what we're interested in is thinking about what happened in the Civil War with the destruction of the house. And in fact, recently we've found some pretty interesting evidence because we've got really nice sort of lead musket balls showing us balls that obviously were available as the ammunition of the day. But more intriguingly, we're also finding the evidence for musket balls that have impacted. They've obviously hit something or someone because they've splattered and they've gone into this very strange shape. So we've got a theory that what we're looking at is the evidence of the conflict that was occurring, the battle that was occurring, and we're finding the real evidence of that with these musket balls and with the end product you're seeing here.
2 years before Basing House fell, it was placed under siege by the parliamentarians as they fought the royalists, led by John Paulet, the Marquis of Winchester. Over 2 years of digging, Chris and his team have mapped out the defensive lines of the now vanished Great House.
As we're walking round the site of Basing House, we've just come to the gun platform, and there were several gun platforms erected during the Civil War. This one, we've got a replica of a Civil War saker, a cannon, which will be pointing out towards the parliamentary lines on the other side. There were several gun platforms all the way around the ringwork area, and in a sense, this was the first line of defence during the Civil War for Basing House.
By surveying the surviving buildings of the Great Tudor Complex, the team has also identified battle damage.
We've now come inside the Great Barn. I think the most amazing example of destruction, if you like, that we can see, where there would have been cannonballs coming through the roof and then actually hitting the inside of the wall. So we can see there's a great big scar on the wall at the top there. There's another one further along.
With Charles I supplying men and money for the house's fortification, it seemed invincible. And after 2 years of trying to batter Basing House into submission, the parliamentarians were getting nowhere.
So, Alan, who did they turn to?
Well, the Lord General Fairfax sent down his second-in-command, a man who might be quite familiar to you. Here he is. Lieutenant General Oliver Cromwell.
Ah, the man himself.
This is a life mask of Oliver that was done a few years after the siege of Basing House. As you can see, he's somewhat plumper than a serving soldier would have been in those days, but it does give you a really good impression of what he looked like.
So if this is a life mask, this is a mould of his actual face?
Indeed, that's Oliver. You see, the eyes are rather odd because they were applied afterwards, because obviously he would have had his eyes shut when the...
It's extraordinary and slightly weird. I still don't think that Oliver Cromwell on his own could have conquered Basing House, so what did he bring with him?
He had a bit of help. He had 3 regiments of foot, several regiments of cavalry, about 5,000 or 6,000 men in actual fact, and some really big guns, including an incredibly big piece of artillery, a cannon royal. That fires a 64-pound ball, and here's an illustration which gives you some idea of the size of the thing. And because of the condition of the roads, sometimes it would take up to 60 horses to pull these down the road, or 60 oxen. Once this was applied against the castle, it doesn't really stand a chance.
So this is bigger than any of the cannon that were actually in Basing House?
Oh, yes, much bigger, yes.
I would not like to have been a royalist facing up against that cannon. So how did they fare?
Well, I think that's what the archaeologists are about to find out.
The new house guarded the entrance to the postern gate, the way into the citadel of Basing House. The team believed that this was the weak point for Cromwell to exploit, and he would have thrown everything he had at the Tudor range, including the firing power of his massive cannon royal. In the last week of the dig, they find evidence to support their theory when they uncover the remains of a bridge which connected the new house to the old.
The postern gate that led into the old house is directly behind us, and this area that we're excavating was part of the entry point for the old house. And what we're thinking is this is the point where in the Civil War the parliamentarians broke through into the old house. And so, can we see anything there that tells us about that final battle? Can we see anything that tells us about their entry to the old house as well?
Previously on this same site, archaeologists uncovered several skeletons around Basing House, which they believe were defenders from the Civil War. But the most significant discovery was the remains of one particular soldier, found by the postern gate, who seems to have died defending this weak spot in the final siege.
To our surprise, after we'd finished excavating the gateway and had a narrow passageway, we saw there was a ditch which we sectioned, and in that ditch we found a skull which had been decapitated. There were some of the vertebrae were there in situ, and there was also a great sword cut on top of the cranium. And so that had to be really the head of one of the defenders of Basing, and as such really must have got there during that final assault on 14th of October 1645. And it's so rare for an archaeologist to be able to find something and say, this happened on this particular day, but we feel confident that that was the case there.
Of the 400 royalists defending Basing House, 100 were slain and the rest taken prisoner, while the great Tudor mansion itself was set on fire.
People could hear the cries of those who'd taken refuge in the cellars, screaming to be let out. But there was no one to let them out. There was no way of reaching them, and so a good number must have perished in that way.
Finally, Cromwell's brutal attack had led to a decisive victory, and he quickly sent word back to London. "I thank God I can give you a good account of Basing. We have had little loss, many of the enemy our men put to the sword. Most of the rest we have prisoners, amongst whom the Marquis of Winchester himself. Your most humble servant, Oliver Cromwell." Archaeology is a complex jigsaw puzzle, drawing together everything from skeletons to swords, and from riches to royalty. Amazing stories which are helping to rewrite our history. Britain has an epic history, but within it there's a wealth of untold secrets still to uncover.
It's a really key find of the week.
So every year, hundreds of archaeologists set out, hunting for clues to solve the mystery of who we are and where we've come from.
We've just found this amazing pendant.
Over the past year, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever. This series will explore the best of them.
Just found a coin. Oh, marvellous.
Brought to you from the field in a very special way.
Each excavation has been filmed for us as it happened by the archaeologists themselves.
It looks absolutely fantastic.
I bet he had a bad day when he never brought these back.
Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every crucial moment of discovery.
Oh, do we have a winner here?
I think it's stunning.
Incredible.
Our archaeologists will be joining us here in our special lab to take a closer look at their finds and to figure out what they really mean. This is so exciting. Welcome to Digging for Britain. In this episode, we're exploring the discoveries from the north of Britain that change what we know about this island's story. We scramble to uncover the earliest origins of Scotland's first kingdoms. We're there for the find of a lifetime that reveals the true extent of Viking power.
Oh, do we have a winner here?
And a new housing development reveals the mass graveyard of warriors whose people may have marched from Europe to settle in Yorkshire.
It looks absolutely fantastic.
These discoveries are rewriting our history. To find out how, archaeologist Matt Williams and I have been given special access to Yorkshire Museum. Its collection tells the story of the North and the people who settled here. The Gilling Sword. And we're going behind the scenes to the back rooms that ordinary visitors just don't get to see. You could get lost in here for days. Carr is an archaeological site of world importance. Excavations began here in 1948 and have revealed a Stone Age settlement 11,000 years old. The whole site covers 5 acres. Discoveries at Carr include the remains of Britain's oldest house, ancient tools and the earliest carpentry in Europe. Finds like these have shown how our Stone Age ancestors lived. Digging for Britain first visited the site in 2011, when I discovered that the team's work had become a race against time. The soil at Carr was becoming acidic and destroying the evidence. So that's some antler from the original excavations on the site.
Yeah.
So when would that have been excavated?
1950.
1950. This antler has been preserved in almost perfect condition, but the items being pulled from the ground 60 years later have deteriorated drastically.
It's like a piece of rubber. It's basically because the water table has fallen dramatically.
Right.
That's let oxygen into the deposits and that's created a chemical reaction. We've been told by our specialists it's a bit like Carr battery acid.
It is shocking to see how the acid is attacking Carr, and it shows just how urgent the work carried out by Nikki and her team really is. But now they are finally running out of time as 6 decades of research at Carr come to an end. They're hoping to solve one last mystery and reveal the true significance of this site to our Stone Age ancestors. Was Carr just a settlement, or do the clues show that it was something much more? This is their dig diary. From day one, it was clear that the soil had become even more acidic.
It's actually very fragile. This is one of the problems that we have. And this bit is turning to jelly.
The chances of finding any well-preserved artefacts seem slim. Then, a couple of weeks in, the archaeologists dug another trench where, remarkably, the soil conditions were very different and the preservation outstanding.
Just cleaning off this area behind me, and it's incredibly exciting. Here we've got an absolutely jam-packed area of bone and flint and wood that we've not seen anywhere else on the site. And in the rest of the trenches, we've had a real problem. We've had very acid conditions, which has meant that the bone and antler has disappeared. So this is a really amazing insight into what people were doing on the edge of the lake here. People are placing bone and antler and wood in this area.
But why would people have been deliberately placing these materials here 11,000 years ago? A few days later, another remarkable discovery could be a clue.
It's a deer.
It is a deer. Yeah.
It's a cluster of deer skulls.
It's a really amazing example. There are lots from this site, but this one is very robust. You can see the antlers here coming off the main skull, and it's also in association with a couple of roe deer skulls, one here and one here. So we're just cleaning it up some more, and then we'll be lifting it very carefully and taking it to the conservation labs.
This discovery is new evidence to support a growing theory that explains the wealth of deer skulls at Carr.
These have been made into headdresses from red deer skulls, and we think that they were possibly used by shamans, wearing them on their heads as part of ritual practices. It's just amazing to think that 11,000 years ago someone might have had one of these on their heads.
In the final few days, even more of these partial deer skulls are uncovered. But can they really be ritual headdresses? I'm in the vaults of York Museum to see the evidence for myself.
Can we open it up?
We can.
Look.
It's like Christmas.
So this is the latest one. So it is just the top of the skull, essentially. We've lost all of the nose and the upper jaw down here.
We have.
So it is just this uppermost part with the antlers attached.
And that's one of the first clues that tells us that this probably isn't just a piece of deer skull that's been found in the ground. It's been worked by human hands for a particular purpose. If this is a deer in its prime, a large deer, it would have very big antlers, and they've been trimmed back. And what that does is effectively makes this a lot lighter. An almost cap-type shape. If you think of a hollowed-out skull, it's almost a cap-type shape going on there. So one of the other features that we see, and we certainly see on other frontlets that have been found, are these piercings, these circular piercings that you see through the skull. Now, these piercings could be for sinew or for cord to pass through. It suggests that this might be something that's been worked by human hands to be worn on the head.
And it's really important as well that this isn't a unique object, that it's one of many that have been found at Carr.
Or just over 20 similar objects have been found at Carr, so this is not a one-off, and they all seem to be treated in the same way. So perhaps it's a group of objects that are being used for a very specific purpose and made in a very specific way.
The archaeologists think it's likely that these skulls really were worn as ritual headdresses. Together with the wealth of votive offerings of antler and bone, the finds suggest that Carr was more than just a settlement. Back at the dig on day 40, the team makes another remarkable and exceptionally rare discovery, which also hints at the ritual significance of Carr.
We have actually just found this amazing pendant, which actually has artwork on it. It's so rare to find something like this. There's only a few pieces of artwork from this country and very few from the whole of Europe. It's very classic Mesolithic. It has geometric lines on it.
An 11,000-year-old pendant, piles of bone and antler. Nikki believes that this could be evidence that Carr held sacred significance.
And we're really beginning to think that these things weren't just lost, they were perhaps some kind of votive offerings that were placed in this particular spot.
A piece of Mesolithic artwork is an extraordinary find anywhere in Europe. I can't wait to hear what this one can tell us about Carr.
This is so exciting. When I heard that you'd found this, I didn't quite believe it, Nikki, I must say. You must have been thrilled to find that on your site.
The more we've looked at it and the more we've analysed it, the more excited we're getting about it, really, because Mesolithic art is incredibly rare, particularly for this country. And so to find something like this is really spectacular.
I can certainly see quite a bit of detail here, but also you've got this enlarged image of it, which really brings it out, doesn't it? That you've got these longer, incised grooves on it, but lots of little tiny grooves as well. An awful lot of detail here.
One interpretation I quite like at the moment is that we might have a tree on here, so that's the trunk and these are the branches coming off it. And I think I'm interested in that because, again, for shamans, sometimes trees can be holy. They link different parts of the spirit world. And so possibly there's something like that to it. The interpretation of pendants in Denmark, where they're usually made of amber, is that they might be amulets, and so they're protecting the person who wears them.
So over the 6 decades or so that excavations have been going on at Carr, what has that added to our knowledge of the Mesolithic in Britain?
Because we've opened up such a large area, we have a much better understanding of how people were living there. We have houses, huts on the dry land. We have great big platforms made out of timbers on the lake edge with all these bones and headdresses and so on around them. And we think that this actually might be quite a special place in the landscape. It's at the mouth of the lake. And when people are coming up river, it's the first place they come to as they reach the lake. So perhaps it's kind of like an entrance way where certain interesting rituals and activities are happening.
The modified deer skulls, votive offerings, and now this exceptionally rare piece of Stone Age art provide us with extraordinary insights into life in Britain 11,000 years ago. The clues from Carr tell us not only about survival on a day-to-day basis, but allow us a precious glimpse into the spiritual and artistic aspects of Mesolithic life. The amazing discoveries at Carr are the work of dedicated professionals, but sometimes we have to thank the devotion, enthusiasm, and luck of a band of amateurs. Metal detectorists are a special breed, spending hours scouring the countryside and beaches looking for treasure. And very, very occasionally, they find some. Now, a hoard of treasure buried in the ground away from human settlement or other signs of human activity on its own can only offer us limited information. But sometimes the objects themselves tell a story, as with this Viking hoard. Dumfries, in the west of Scotland, where a keen metal detectorist invested months of his own time researching one particular field. What Derek McLennan found was the discovery of his lifetime that reveals the wide connections of the Vikings.
It was harvest time, so there was bales of hay in the field, and I'd been going up and down towards one particular bale, and then I decided to change tack and move to another bale. I got a signal, which was very faint, but it sounded like iron. But I thought, well, I've already dug 30 nails, so one more nail won't harm me. And I put the spade into the ground and dug out the clod, noticed something glinting in the hole, put my hand into it, it was quite deep, and when I pulled it out I saw it was silver, rubbed my thumb across it and instantly seen the saltire design, which I knew from my research was a Viking symbol.
Derek realised the importance of his find, so he immediately called the local authorities. They sent an archaeologist to help with the excavation. What they uncovered together was truly astounding. A hoard of Viking arm rings and gold ingots. But there was more.
Oh,
wow! A large Christian cross.
Do we have a winner here?
Its stunning decorations revealed for the first time in 1,000 years.
At that moment, my senses erupted, and the excitement and joy of what I'd discovered really hit me.
But there was even more treasure to come, including this beautiful pot, still wrapped in protective fabric.
The Viking Hoard of the decade, I think.
The Vikings were pagan invaders who came from Scandinavia to raid Britain and to set up their own kingdoms here in 793 AD. This find could reveal new insights into this turbulent chapter in British history. So it's been handed to a team from Historic Scotland for analysis. When they lifted the lid of the pot, even more treasure was packed inside. To find out what
the team turns to modern scanning technology.
And that's got quite a density.
Yeah, and then there's a layer of dense material right down at the bottom here. So you can see it's got a lattice on it there.
Yeah.
I'll just see if we can rack through and have a look at some of the other objects.
The scans reveal rings, brooches and other pieces of fine jewellery packed inside the pot. Excavating and conserving them has taken months. Now, almost a year after making his remarkable discovery, Derek has come to view the treasures for himself.
Attached on the inside there. It's kind of hard to put into words. I'm absolutely stunned by the amount of artefacts that are come out of the pot, and the textiles, everything being so carefully wrapped and packed. Shows that even 1200 years ago, these objects were very coveted and cared for.
This hoard is full of riches and mystery. It brings the Viking world alive and shows that there was more to these legendary warriors than just raiding.
Richard, I think the appropriate response is, wow, this is astonishing. What a beautiful collection.
It's pretty remarkable stuff, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And it's wonderful to see it all laid out like this.
One particular treasure has been fashioned from a silver coin, which gives a clue to the date and origins of the hoard.
There's the word Rex.
Yes.
And if you come back round here, you can start with C-O-E-N-W-U-L-F. Coenwulf.
Coenwulf.
Rex.
Coenwulf was the Viking king of Mercia in the Midlands. He ruled from 796 to 821 AD, leading experts to believe that this is when the hoard dates from, a period when Viking raids on Britain were intensifying.
So do you think this is Viking plunder that's been gathered together and buried in the ground?
You can't help but start to speculate that this is some form of Viking raiding booty. Why would someone who was a devout Christian bury things like that wonderful cross?
This cross is
Well, yes, I mean,
gorgeous.
this is exceptional. And a beautiful, wonderful, simple form of the Celtic cross with what we think are the four apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John.
Isn't that wonderful?
Can you see the saint's head with the,
Yes, you
and
can
then
see
the
the
hand
halo.
there?
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, that's straight out of Book of Kells manuscript, isn't it?
It is, it's wonderful.
And the cross is straight out of the wonderful St John's cross on Iona, for example. It's quite something.
This cross is typical of the treasures plundered by Vikings from Christian monasteries across Britain and Europe. But further clues in the hoard show that the Vikings weren't only interested in raiding, they were motivated by commerce as well.
This is beautiful, this pot.
At the top are these series of 8 glass beads of various shapes and forms, some of them held in clasps with metal or silver fixings.
But there seems to be a variety of objects
Yes,
and of
yes,
different
yeah,
styles
yeah,
coming from
yeah.
different places, coming from France, Anglo-Saxon styles and Viking styles. So what's this object in here then, Richard?
We think that what you see between the gold braid is a glass vessel of some description, sitting within a very fine leather pouch with this extraordinary sumptuous silk, a Samite silk from the Far East or the Middle East. It's something very precious and very special, wrapped in something which was very, very exotic.
Eastern treasures like this remind us that there was more to the Vikings than simple raiding. By the 11th century, the Vikings' vast trading network stretched across Europe, beyond Constantinople, all the way to Baghdad. They were a trading superpower, which engaged with cultures right across the known world. But the Vikings weren't the first foreign power to colonise Britain. The Romans began their conquest centuries earlier, in 43 AD. The story of Rome's 400-year rule is well known. But what happened here after the Roman Empire fell is still a mystery.
The end of Roman rule in Britain saw us plunged into the Dark Ages, several obscure centuries for which there is little written record. And actually finding archaeological evidence from this period of time is relatively rare. But a team of archaeologists is hoping to strike it lucky with a new dig at an abandoned Roman military fort near Lancaster. This is the famous Roman fort of Ribchester, where a team is digging for evidence to explain what happened in Britain after the Roman Empire fell, and to reveal if we really did slip into centuries of chaos, often thought of as the Dark Ages. They start by excavating the Roman road running through the fort and get their first intriguing clue.
Just cleaned off this Roman road surface, and we've just discovered that it's been robbed, which is really interesting.
The road appears to have been dismantled after the Roman occupation, with the heaviest stones taken away.
It's a really nice insight into the operations of the fort pretty much after the Romans have left, because they're destroying the infrastructure of it to build buildings and taking that material away somewhere else.
So what were these Dark Age Britons building with this stone, and where? The team thinks they found the first clues at the other end of the fort.
Beginning of week 3, and we have large bits of tile, and that more intense orange is the robbed away hearth, and that orange burning element there suggests we've got sort of workshop activities taking place within that building.
The burnt orange earth suggests that this was the site of a fire, built after the Roman administration had collapsed. But this fire does seem to be on an industrial scale, making it possible evidence of manufacturing. And further excavation reveals what they may have been making.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic piece of evidence. Really nice thing there. That is really good evidence that the manufacturing here involved glass. There's a little bit of a runoff of glass, probably from recycling old vessels and stuff like that. It's a really key find. Find of the week. Thank you very much.
We sometimes think of Dark Age Britain as extremely backward. But with this glass and the signs of an industrial fire, this dig could be revealing something very different. Britons converting an old Roman fort into workshops. It's new evidence for an era of enterprise, and further finds offer more clues to this new British post-Roman economy.
I've just found a coin. Oh, marvellous. So it is. So it's a tiny 3rd or 4th century Roman coin. Marvellous. There we go.
The team finds over 20 more coins, all from around the same workshop building. Now Duncan has brought these and his other finds into our lab. We're hoping that they can tell us how this fort was used after Roman rule collapsed, and shine a light on the truth about Britain in the Dark Ages.
Okay, so we found 22 coins when we were excavating there, in those very, very top surfaces. And so I think that this is the very, very end of the Roman use of the fort.
Can we have a look at some of these coins? I'll
Yeah,
bring this over so that we can see them a bit more clearly.
The head on that side is hardly visible, isn't it? It's almost smooth.
Hardly visible, exactly. We're looking at a lot of wear and use that's going on as well.
But so this is a Roman coin.
It's a Roman
who's
coin.
The emperor on that then?
Valentinian is the emperor on that one. So it's minted between 364 and 378.
But Duncan believes that these coins were deposited perhaps 2 centuries later. They're very heavily worn, suggesting that they may have been used long after Roman rule in Britain ended in 410.
And I think given that we've got all that wear, these coins were probably in circulation for quite a long time. Certainly after you see the collapse of sort of Roman administration, really, coins and pottery are no longer created in the same volumes or at all as they were previously. But the people who live in these forts and in these sort of Roman landscape places almost certainly remain there. So they continue to use quite a lot of this material culture. And certainly I think that, you know, we shouldn't be seeing this as an absolute cut-off point. We shouldn't be saying, you know, 410 AD, the Romans left. What is happening is part of a continuous decline, or transformation is probably a better way of thinking about it, into something completely different.
Without military rule, post-Roman society in Britain would undoubtedly have been more dangerous. But this new evidence suggests that it may have been more sophisticated than we thought.
So the person who dropped this coin here, for example, what was he doing in the fort?
What we're seeing there is a whole series of different manufacturing activities. So we've got the glass that you can see there, we've got the weights, we've got coins for trade and exchange. We think we've got tanning pits, and we think we've got evidence of iron making as well.
But wouldn't you have expected those things to be present in a Roman fort as well?
Not necessarily, no. By the time you get into the 4th century, it becomes quite a dangerous place to be. If you're moving large numbers of goods and valuable things across the north of Britain, you're probably going to be attacked. There's probably lots of brigands around, that sort of stuff. So I suspect that as we start to see the breakdown of that administration, of the safety networks that exist, then you see that manufacturing to support the fort and starting to take place within it itself.
These finds show that we're wrong to think of the Dark Ages as a period of utter chaos and decline in Britain. Archaeology suggests that this was in fact a new age of resourcefulness, when Britons began their own trades and industries and built a new society. While England was being rebuilt after the Romans, in Scotland it was a different story. Here, the earliest line of Scottish kings was reaching the height of their power. But today, the full story of these northern rulers remains shrouded in mystery. The Picts were the ancient people of Scotland, depicted by history as fearsome, painted warriors, feared even by the Romans. While southern Britain fell to the armies from Rome, here in the north, the Picts were largely unconquered. They continued to rule across Scotland and into northern England, right up until the 10th century. But their story is little known. Hard evidence of the Picts and their kingdom has been hard to find. Now, though, a team of archaeologists thinks they might just have pinpointed the seat of Pictish power. Here's their dig diary. Some of the very few clues the Picts left behind are giant symbol stones. The most famous is the 6-foot-tall, terrifying-looking Rhynie Man. These stones seem to be linked with Pictish royalty. Archaeologist Gordon Noble has spent his entire career searching for evidence of the Picts, and he's now digging at a site in the east of Scotland where some of their mysterious symbol stones have been found. He's hoping to unearth the seat of forgotten Pictish kings.
Right, here we are at Carr. This is the site where, in the 19th century, 6 Pictish symbol stones were found on top of the sea stack here. Only a few people have visited the site in the 20th century and didn't really note much on top. But already yesterday was our first ascent, which was quite precarious and slightly scary. We found remains on top.
It's a promising find, but to fully investigate it, they'll have to make the dangerous climb all over again. The stack is 60 feet tall, surrounded by jagged rocks, and the chilly North Atlantic. A strong defensive position for a Pictish warrior tribe, but not the easiest commute for a team of archaeologists. However, if they have found a Pictish fort, it will all have been worth it.
Right, so we're on top of the sea stack now, where the symbol stones were found. We're at the lower portion of what we think is the fortified site.
Following the trail of the symbol stones pays off immediately. The very first trial trench reveals an area of flat stones, possibly a hearth.
So it looks like evidence of actual occupation activities actually on top of the promontory here. So that's quite exciting. We've got lots of charcoal with fragments of animal bone. So hopefully this will give a good evidence of how people were using the promontory in the past.
It's a promising start,
And another trench provides evidence that this site may in fact have been a dwelling or even a fortress.
Okay, so we're in test pit 5 at the moment. So we've just opened this up and we've found a series of post holes. We've got one that's the fill's been excavated out, and then we've uncovered another 4 over here in a row. You can see them over here, and there's another possible one, half a one, sitting over in the corner out here. So this might be part of a building, we don't quite know yet. But we're taking samples from that one, so we'll wait and see what we've got for the rest.
A line of post holes suggests a wooden wall. And by day 4, the team has uncovered hard evidence of a substantial fortification.
So we've got some quite exciting results here. We've got remains of big slots here. These were for timber beams, and this one here projects all the way from the edge of the cliff up to this feature here, which is a giant, very large post hole here. So it looks like we've got both upright timber elements and horizontal timber elements, creating this big wall enclosing the sea stack here. So that's quite exciting and great detail really on the construction methods for this rampart here.
The team have found compelling evidence that this was once a fortified site. But to be sure that it belonged to the Picts, they'll have to radiocarbon date their finds.
That rock stack looked really difficult to access. Presumably it would have been connected to the mainland by a more significant causeway, perhaps.
We think so. We think it was probably a promontory in the Pictish period, which makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't want to build a fort on top of the stack today, certainly.
The dating came back with some staggering results. This sea fort does date to the time of the Picts, but incredibly, it's 200 years older than anyone expected.
Well, it's quite interesting. The dates for most Pictish forts fall into the 5th and 6th centuries AD, when they really seem to reach their height of construction and use. But this example here, we just got the radiocarbon dates back, and it's actually 3rd and 4th centuries AD, which is really interesting. So it's the earliest example that we have so far.
What's more, they think that this fort was just one of a string of coastal defences built by the Picts to defend their territory.
And we know that these defending enclosures were deeply implicated in kingship. So we perhaps have the first glimmers, really, of that process where we get the emergence of these early kingdoms in northern Britain.
So if this is the emergence of early Pictish kingdoms, what's that growing out of?
Smaller scale societies in the Iron Age, certainly, or certainly a shift towards more lineage-based models where we're getting certain individuals styling themselves as kings and really underlining their power by building these forts.
So they're growing into bigger political units, effectively?
Really, this period is the birth or the first evidence for these essentially what become the early medieval states of Northern Europe emerging. So it's a really, really important time period.
The discovery of Britain's earliest Pictish fort is huge, but it is not the seat of royal power Gordon was hoping for. So he's starting a new dig at Rhynie itself, whose place name comes from the Celtic word for king. This was where Rhynie Man once stood, and the site is still marked by other mysterious symbol stones.
These symbol stones date to the 5th and 6th centuries AD, and we have this contemporary complex of monuments and enclosures round about the standing stone here. The standing stone here, the cross stain, which hopefully you can see that there's a salmon here and a Pictish beast as well. Big long legs here and the snout here and this little mane on the top here.
The symbol stone marks the entrance to a huge circular enclosure. His hunch now is that the scale of this site shows it was far more significant than the fort at Dunakerr.
So we're trying to uncover a bit more of this settlement this year. And so we've dug this very large trench, about 40 metres by 35 metres, to uncover more elements of the enclosure complex.
This new trench reveals the circular enclosure was defined by a deep outer ditch and a defensive timber wall or palisade.
Right, day 12 at Rhynie, a lovely summer's day. So we're down here looking at the palisade and post setting that defines the outer boundary of the fort here. So we're getting some really quite exciting architectural details down here, beginning to find evidence of actual planks and post settings here. And then just over to my right, over here, there's a whole line of post holes, and these seem to respect this outer enclosure here. So we've got a big wooden plank-based wall on the outside, and then big posts on the inside, perhaps creating a raised platform, a raised walkway round the edge of the fort right here.
Gordon's team has found evidence of a huge fort. It would have been 60 metres in diameter. And its defensive wall was complex. The team has found the remains of a second wall outside the first. It begins to look like Gordon's hunch has paid off. His team may have discovered a royal stronghold worthy of the first kings of Scotland.
The reason this big wooden wall is important is because we know that in this period Pictish kings are closely tied to these fortified sites, and that seems to be one of the underpinnings of their rulership. And we've had very few excavations of this scale to actually reveal this important architectural detail, and really the scale of the outer enclosure is really quite staggering at this relatively early phase in the 5th and 6th centuries AD.
The Pictish kings are Britain's most mysterious rulers. And now Gordon's team has pushed back the date of the rise of their power and discovered what may have been one of their primary strongholds. But incredibly, that's not all. Gordon has also discovered evidence here to show how the Pictish kings lived, and he's brought it back to our lab.
So who actually lived at a palace like this? I mean, a king, what kind of area would he have covered? Was it his family there? Would there have been an army there?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I'd call it a palace. I'd call it a kind of royal complex, really. Okay. It's clearly, perhaps, at certain times of the year, people lived there. We have buildings inside. But at the same time, we don't have any evidence for actual, grinding of grain or some of the more everyday tasks. I think this is more likely a place where kings are coming at certain times of the year and entertaining his followers.
Some of the finds reveal that this entertaining was done in a lavish style, using imported luxuries.
So these things don't look like much. They look like, bits of toffee or something. But this is incredibly rare pottery in Britain and Ireland in this time period.
So where's it actually from?
We don't know exactly, but somewhere in the eastern Mediterranean. And these would have been big storage at Amphora of the 6th century AD or late 5th century. They're probably for storing wine or some other exotic foodstuff.
Do you think by the time they got to Scotland they still had wine in there?
I hope so. I can't imagine why else they would come so far. So these are the northernmost examples found in Britain and Ireland so far. And they're coming really far inland.
So the Pictish kings of Rhynie getting a bit of a taste for the luxuries of the Mediterranean.
That's right, yes. It's amazing to think, really, that Pictish high-status people were sitting in Rhynie drinking Mediterranean wine in the 6th century. It's quite a fantastic image, really, isn't it?
There was more going on at Rhynie than just fine dining. The team also found signs of a ritual offering of cattle bones and teeth buried in a pit right underneath the spot where Gordon believes Rhynie man himself once stood.
it's another clue to the ritual significance of the fort.
It's not the most defensible location. Most forts in this time period are on promontories or on hills. So this is a more lowland location. And what we think we've got here is that it's using the language of defence, but actually there's perhaps more going on here. So the Rhynie man, for example, carries this axe, and it's thought to be a sacrificial axe for poleaxing cattle. So we think there's probably cult dimensions to the site, as well as being perhaps a residence at certain times of the year.
The team is delving into the mysteries of the Picts, and they've revealed what appears to have been a very early royal site, 2 centuries older than anyone expected to find. Here perhaps was the seat of Pictish power, a royal court with luxuries from the Mediterranean. For Gordon, it's a satisfying conclusion to his year-long search for the Picts. In archaeology, some fantastic discoveries come only after years of painstaking research. Others are made by chance and often against the clock.
Before any major construction project gets underway, the developers must first call in the archaeologists to survey the site and to save any archaeology it might contain. Commercial digs like this often turn up surprising and exciting finds, as our next dig diary shows, when archaeologists uncovered evidence of one of the most intriguing Iron Age cultures in Britain.
November 2014, in a small Yorkshire village, and a team is beginning a dig to rescue the archaeology from a site where a housing estate is planned. Time is tight. The excavation needs to be completed so construction can get underway. But within days, it's clear there's more to this site than anyone had predicted. When the archaeologists begin to unearth an array of 2,000-year-old burial mounds, known as barrows.
Right, it's John's. Very exciting 3 barrows now. John, would you mind coming to describe your burial, please?
We've got a crouch burial lying on its left side, facing east, with the head to the north.
So you've still got quite a lot to do.
Oh yeah,
here.
well, that's six burials in this one barrow alone. There's 2 that Mark's got that are just north. There's one definite grave in there, and then I see some black patches that are still to be explored. Tons to do.
Brilliant.
More and more graves are unearthed, until it's clear that the site for the new housing estate is actually a large Iron Age cemetery. And it's such an incredibly rare find, the developers agree to give the archaeologists more time.
We're going to start stripping this area this afternoon, which we hope to see an extension of the Square Barrow Cemetery. Obviously there's great anticipation because we still have no idea what's under here.
As burial after burial is revealed, the team realise that until now, their excavations only scratch the surface of this extraordinary site.
Oh, looking good. Extremely good.
For months, the team works against the clock, until by day 149, they have revealed a staggering 38 square barrows.
Within the cemetery, we have all shapes and sizes of square barrows. This one's the classic representation, 8 metres by 6 metres, with a central grave. We've got a much smaller one here, but still with a central grave.
Barrow graves like these are usually associated with high-status individuals, like this man, who has been carefully laid out with his shield.
Yes. It looks absolutely fantastic.
If we're right in saying that this is a shield, then that's pretty special.
Yeah.
And it's one for Pete to tick off his list.
Yeah. We came here 8 months ago anticipating a couple of square barrows, but in fact we've actually got an Iron Age square barrow cemetery. We've excavated over 60 barrows and 101 skeletons to date.
This vast cemetery was a chance find, made because of a housing development. But who were the mysterious Iron Age tribe buried here? Only now can the analysis begin, with the skeleton of a 25-year-old man, buried with an array of weapons.
He dates to the Iron Age. He's obviously significant within his community. It's highly likely that he was a warrior, that he was afforded more ritual than the other burials that we're seeing. He's a significant member of his community.
And is this the only sword you've got on site?
Yes.
Then?
Yeah, this is the only example. We've got other objects that have been found within the barrows, but that's the only sword that we've got. We've got an iron blade with the scabbard still adhering to it, made of timber, and then the horn handle.
And these little bits of bronze as well?
Yes.
Here and here? Yeah. So quite decorative up the top there.
It would have been really decorative, yes.
The fine craftsmanship hints at a sword that once belonged to someone of high status. And the spearheads found beside the body offer further insights into the burial afforded to this high-ranking man.
Along with the sword, the person had been buried with several spears that you can see around his body, and they hadn't been placed, they're just randomly positioned within the grave.
Do you imagine people throwing them into the grave then?
That's what we thought. As part of his ritual, that they stood at the top of the grave and that they were placing these spears within the grave.
This cemetery is in Yorkshire, but the style of the burials, the contents of the graves, and the design of this sword are distinctly continental. It's a mysterious phenomenon known as Arras culture and unique in Britain to East Yorkshire. York Museum holds an extraordinary collection of Arras treasures, showing cultural connections with France. And they reveal that these Iron Age people venerated not just their warrior men, but more remarkably, their women.
These beads are utterly astonishing, aren't they? They're beautiful.
They're one of my favourite objects from these cemeteries. And the wonderful thing about this necklace, which was found in a fairly elderly woman's barrow, we think, is that it's composed of lots of different types of beads. These are eye beads, and cross-culturally we know that's quite a powerful symbol to ward off evil. But these beads come from a different necklace. These are wave beads, again, from another necklace. These eye beads have been made in a completely different way to these ones.
So this perhaps suggests that they weren't all made at the same time specifically to make this necklace then?
No, I think they've come from a range of different necklaces, and perhaps as a woman, as you enter your more senior years of life, you inherit these beads through mothers and grandmothers, perhaps as you come through things like the major rites of passage, like childbirth, and survive it, which not all women did. And this is something that you wear as a senior female figure in that community that speaks of those connections with your maternal forebears. So I think that's an extraordinary object that speaks of that biography of your connections and the families of which you're a part.
And how does the Arras culture specifically fit within what's going on around it? I mean, does it fit within the rest of the Iron Age culture in the area?
It's peculiar because there are very few other people who formally bury their dead at this time. So the phenomenon of the square barrow cemeteries is really quite unique. It has connections with the continent. That's where you might expect to see that kind of barrow. And so it's possible that that idea is being brought over by somebody important or powerful. So for all intents and purposes, our locals are at least first or second generation incomers.
The discovery of the Arras cemetery was unexpected and extraordinary. It offers us tantalising evidence of our links to the continent in the Iron Age and to a possible mysterious tribe of ancient immigrants who came from Europe to settle in the heart of Yorkshire 2,000 years ago. From Arras to Carr, archaeology can reveal how our ancestors lived, and what they thought. While from Scottish kings who built a new kingdom to Dark Age Britons who built a new way of life, it can illuminate worlds we never thought we could know. To reveal the ancient people with new ideas who laid the foundations for our modern Britain. We might be a small island, but we've got a big history that's still full of mysteries. So every year, hundreds of archaeologists go out hunting for clues to our forgotten past.
I have never seen anything like that.
In 2016, their discoveries have been more exciting than ever.
It's all happening now.
You little devil, Johan!
Yeah.
In this episode, Digging for Britain showcases the very best of them from the West.
Each excavation was filmed as it happened by the archaeologists themselves. Their dig diaries mean that we can be there for every exciting moment of discovery.
Cracking little find.
Superb.
And now the archaeologists are bringing their finds from pottery to metalwork to human remains into our lab so that we can get a closer look at them and find out what they tell us about our British ancestors. Welcome to Digging for Britain.
In this episode, we're joining archaeologists in the West as they make discoveries that will transform the history of Britain. On Jersey, a 2,000-year-old hoard of hidden treasure
It's heavy.
reveals the terror of the Roman invasion.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
In Tintagel, Cornwall, an incredible Dark Age palace is uncovered at the mythical home of King Arthur.
See, I'm starting to go on flights of fancy now, and to me, this is where King Arthur lived.
And on Salisbury Plain, a lost map unearths hidden trenches that revolutionise our view of the First World War.
This is as if the British have captured the German trenches and then they have to dig in facing German counterattack from up the hill.
To put these revelations in context, I've come to Bristol Museum.
And I've been given privileged behind-the-scenes access to see some of the archaeological treasures rarely seen by the public.
But our first dig diary takes us 40 miles away to Stonehenge. "3,000 years ago, our ancestors built Stonehenge as a site of ceremony and ritual west of the River Avon. In recent years, archaeologists have come to believe that Stonehenge is just part of a vast sacred landscape full of monuments. But so far, their discoveries have mainly been to the west of the Avon. What lies to the east has largely been a mystery, until this year, when a team from Wessex Archaeology started digging at Bulford.
At Bulford, just 3 miles away from Stonehenge, the discoveries were not only unexpected, they were unique, and they're helping to write a whole new chapter in the history of this archaeologically rich landscape.
Shiv this out a bit.
Phil Harding leads the team.
Hi, this is Phil Harding. I'm talking to you on the edge of Salisbury Plain, about 3 miles east of Stonehenge. That's in that direction there. And I'm working on a site here. We've been working here since, just before Christmas now. And this is really quite an exciting site. Come and have a look.
The team has uncovered something never seen in Britain before. A double henge, 2 circular banks and ditches.
So what we found are 2 previously unknown henge monuments. This is an incredible opportunity to unravel part of the ritual landscape of this part of Wiltshire, most importantly, just down the road from Stonehenge.
So what Phil really wants to find out is whether this site was in use at the same time as Stonehenge, and exactly what our Neolithic ancestors were doing here. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a series of pits just outside the double henge.
That is amazing.
Phil hopes that these will provide the evidence he needs.
An axe. Excellent.
It's a promising find.
That is absolutely gorgeous. With a blade there, just beautifully polished.
Neolithic axes were incredibly important tools used for the clearing of trees during the earliest days of farming. Putting one in a pit seems like a huge sacrifice.
There would be plenty of use left in this, and to place one of these in a pit, throw away a genuinely useful axe. Why would you do it?
As well as dozens of axe heads, mysterious chalk balls are found in the pits.
Ah, lovely. Oh, what a gem.
These are finds that connect us to our ancestors, and for Phil, it's precious evidence of what they were doing here.
I'm sure they must have been maybe lucky mementos, maybe superstitious, maybe totemic items, some sort of votive offering to the gods, and maybe it brought them good luck.
In 1 week, 40 pits are excavated, and what's found in each one is remarkably similar.
This is an incredible collection of material. It's as though people have got a checklist and they're placing objects into the pit.
These are such enigmatic clues, glimpses of the rituals being carried out at the double henge.
Didn't want to come.
But some of the pits contain something rather different.
Now, that is what I call a bone.
It's from an aurochs.
God, look at the size of it.
A giant prehistoric cow.
The aurochs was not on the average Friday night takeaway menu. I think what we are really looking at is festive, feasting, celebrations. Who knows, it might be seasonal, it might be marriage, it could be any other things. But what it is not is your day-to-day rubbish.
This seems then to be a ritual site where our ancestors held religious feasts. But can Phil be sure that it's contemporary with Stonehenge?
Can we prove that these ring ditches is of the same date as our Neolithic pits? If we can do that, then we actually find an incredible ritual complex of the same date as maybe Stonehenge.
The team digs a trench across the double henge, looking for evidence that will give them a date.
Phil, look at that.
What you got there then? Pot?
Yeah, that's a decoration.
Ah! That is?
Yeah.
I swear that is. That's decorated. You little devil, Johan.
It's a fragment of pottery.
Well, I'm getting really, really excited about this because it looks like it is decorated. You can see there's a bit of a ridge there and a bit of a ridge there, and these grooves. And I think that that is the best indicator that we've got of grooved ware, which is the typical late Neolithic pottery. That is what we want to find.
Grooved ware pottery like this dates from the same period as Stonehenge, so it strongly suggests that this double henge was in use at the same time. I've invited Phil to come into our lab with some of his finds to give me a fuller picture as to what our ancestors were really up to at this unique site.
They are places where people are gathering together and feasting, and they have to be ceremonial monuments.
So these very strange balls, I mean, what are those about?
These are made out of chalk. What you'll notice in some places, look at that, you can see the actual manufacturing traces. Now, chalk is a very soft rock. If you start beating it about too much, you will wear those manufacturing traces away. So I think that they are ritual material, being made for some function, and then they are then being placed in the pit. Those spheres, those balls are special.
Now, what about the stone tools then? So these were coming out of the pits as well?
Axes. Axes were incredibly powerful objects to them. They're almost symbolic offerings to show their wealth, their status, their power, because the material that is in the pits is the refuse, if you like, from people who are carrying out the ceremonies in our henge-type monuments.
This completely unexpected discovery reveals a significant ritual site where Neolithic people gathered for ceremonies and feasting.
By the time you've done all your post-excavation work on this, what are you going to add to our understanding of the Stonehenge landscape?
The people at my site would probably have witnessed the construction of Stonehenge.
They're just a few miles away.
And what we've now done is we're moving our knowledge from the west bank of the River Avon and showing that equally as important is life on the east bank. And it just blows me over. I mean, I'm just absolutely...
Britain's first double henge is a massive discovery that over the next few years could fundamentally change our understanding of how our ancestors 4,500 years ago used the Stonehenge landscape. Our next excavation also takes place on Salisbury Plain, just 5 miles away from Stonehenge. But the story it's revealing is very different and took place just 100 years ago.
2016 was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, the bloodiest battle in the history of the British Army, with 60,000 casualties on the first day alone. Those that led the campaign have been widely criticised for the way the battle was fought, for the inexperience and inadequate training of the soldiers. But does archaeology support that perception that the young men of Britain were sent to the Western Front like lambs to the slaughter?
Salisbury Plain. Covering an area the size of the Isle of Wight, for over 100 years it's been the site of Britain's largest military training ground. During World War I, thousands of soldiers came here in preparation for fighting in the trenches of northern France. However, it's often thought that this training was too short and inadequate. Incredibly, a map has been uncovered in the National Archive that might change this perception once and for all. It suggests that the army was at least planning to recreate German trenches of the Western Front in these fields, so our soldiers could rehearse attacks on them. But were those trenches ever actually dug and used for training? Military archaeologist Richard Osgood has come to investigate.
To get a map of where they've sited these practice trenches is really unusual. You've got individual notifications on the map, so an S is a shelter. MG, you might have guessed, is a machine gun position. To get all that together is really a huge opportunity. But nonetheless, the map tells you about what they're meant to do. It doesn't tell you what actually does happen. Maybe this map was schematic, maybe it's not what's dug. Our job here over the next couple of weeks is really to see what's left under the ground, and the ideal would be to get architecture from trenches and evidence for the lives of the people that were here 100 years ago.
trench warfare dominated World War I. With the invention of new powerful weapons such as massed artillery bombardments and rapid-firing machine guns, soldiers were forced to dig trenches to hide in for protection. Soldiers could live in these trenches for weeks at a time before being ordered to go over the top and charge at the enemy. If Richard can prove that extensive German trench fortifications were recreated on Salisbury Plain, it's proof that the soldiers sent here received comprehensive training in attacking German positions, dispelling the notion that they were ill-prepared. On the first day of the dig, Richard's team starts to look for evidence of one of the German frontline trenches marked on the map.
We're looking for a machine gun position. It's marked, helpfully, MG on the map. Already we're finding lots and lots of traces of the architecture of the trench, and this is just stripping the topsoil off.
Richard finds a post from which barbed wire would have been hung, cleverly designed so it could be put into the ground without making a noise.
If you're putting a barbed wire fence into no man's land, you're hitting it with a hammer, it's making a big noise, and snipers soon are attracted to that. The way they work out how to deal with that is to put these things in, and this will have a sort of a corkscrew at the bottom, and to put it into the ground you put a stick through this eyelet and then you wind it down into the ground.
And a few metres away they find the barbed wire that it would have supported.
You know, you look at the obstacle of that. Imagine having that in front of the feature you're trying to take. It's a real impediment.
Then, just behind where the barbed wire was found, they discover what they've been looking for. A section of a front-line German trench.
So we're on the German frontline trenches, and we were hoping to find the firing positions. Do you think we've got any evidence for that, Rich?
We've got some really good evidence. We've got what we've identified now as a fire step. So a fire step is what lets you stand up out of the trench. So when you need to fire, you can get up, you can fire over the top, and then when you finish, you can get down into the relative safety of that extra 1.5 foot worth of soil.
This is clear evidence that the soldiers were training to capture authentically recreated frontline German trenches. But were the fortifications marked on the map behind the front line also built? If they were, it would prove that the soldiers were training not only to attack the front line, but also to fight right through to the rear.
Okay, so we've got this really interesting shelter, and importantly we've got the corrugated iron roof that covered the shelter. We've got this little step here, which is probably some sort of seating arrangement so that with the roof above people could sit underneath.
Shelters like these would have offered some protection from the elements, as well as from the shrapnel of artillery bombardments.
Even more interesting is at the very bottom we've got all this trample, which actually shows where the troops would have been walking during the time of using these trenches.
The trample floor isn't the only evidence that these trenches weren't just for show, but were used by large numbers of soldiers.
What we're looking at, is it a latrine or not?
It is a latrine. For you, it's more of a urinal rather than a proper toilet. We know that because of the yellow sandy-like material at the bottom.
That's put very politely.
Richard is now excavating trenches even further back from the front line, and here he finds evidence of how soldiers were trained to continue the battle once the German trenches had been captured.
There's a shelf facing up the hill in each of these little slots. This is as if the British have captured the German trenches and they've worked their way through the German front line, they've got through the reserve and support lines, and then they have to dig in facing the presumed German counterattack from up the hill.
It's evidence that major battle simulations were taking place here. After 2 weeks, they've uncovered an extensive network of trenches, shelters and machine gun positions, a faithful recreation of what soldiers could expect to encounter on battlefields like the Somme.
They utilised the high ground over there, they utilised the high ground in front of me, and the hillside behind me, and this is just the German positions. This is hectares and hectares. It's a vast training landscape.
It's incredible that this map had been lost, and without it we wouldn't have had a clue that so much effort had been made in recreating such an amazingly huge trench system. Richard's discovery on the ground changes World War I history and the view that soldiers were poorly trained before being sent to war.
People that are training through this in 1915 are getting as good an experience as they possibly can. This is the example of generals really trying their very best to give the training required for what's going to happen in 1916, getting away from the idea of these chaps just walking around the parade square with broom handles and then being sent to imminent death on the Battle of the Somme.
Even practising on Salisbury Plain, trench warfare must have been miserable. So what can archaeology tell us about the men who trained here? Richard has come into the lab to tell me. And you've got some of the artefacts here as well.
Yeah, we do. This is all about morale in many ways. You can be bored in the trenches and wet and miserable, and the one thing you want to do if you're sitting there cold and tired is to have a brew. And that tin over there, that's a tin of condensed milk.
Right.
And the soldiers bayoneted it.
Yeah.
You can imagine them sitting there in the trench, need a brew, and you pour that, the condensed milk in, chuck the tin away. And that's, I think that's lovely. That's all about keeping sane, frankly. The other thing you've got connected with that sort of thing is that thing. I'm really pleased this was empty and we didn't damage it in opening it, because that's a tin of sardines. You can imagine what that would have been like 100 years on if we'd opened it.
Yeah.
But again, having things like tins of fish, cups of tea, will make these practice trenches not seem quite so bad as they might otherwise. They're not under fire from the Germans here, but nonetheless, they've got the same sort of misery of existence, and that's the sort of thing that's critical to get into the training.
And what's this? This has got some writing on it.
You can see Liverpool reg on it. It's part of the King's Liverpool Regiment. You think of the famous Kitchener poster in 1914, the big recruitment one. It's these guys, recruited in 1914, but we had no idea that they were pretty certainly here, training for what became the Battle of the Somme, and they've left that carving behind.
So they've just carved that in a lump of chalk.
Bored soldier carving their regiment into this thing, and it ends up in the bottom of the trench.
But a fantastic record they were there.
Oh, it's lovely. And we didn't know they were there. That's why archaeology is brilliant, because that links you to the people, and that's what's so crucial, that you get back to those individual stories of those guys that were here in the First War. After that training experience, they then go through into this very famous first day of the Battle of the Somme, and for them, it goes pretty well. They take relatively... Yeah,
because there are thousands and thousands
famous
of
figure of
casualties.
60,000 casualties on the first day. But for the Liverpool pals, they fight alongside the French on the right-hand side of the British attack, and they take all their objectives and they take relatively few casualties. And that's not the story you get when you think of the Battle of the Somme.
Despite the extensive training that Richard has shown these soldiers received, training wasn't enough. Just a few weeks after their success on the first day of the Somme, the 4,000 eager young volunteers of the Liverpool Pals had received over 1,000 casualties. A shocking 1 in 4.
This is one of Bristol Museum's greatest treasures, the Thornbury Hoard. It consists of 11,460 coins, and it was buried in the 4th century AD, just as the Roman army was withdrawing from Britain. But actually, this pales into insignificance beside a recently discovered hoard, one of the largest ever found, this time dating to the 1st century BC, when Britain was on the cusp of being assimilated into the Roman Empire.
The island of Jersey. In 2012, 2 metal detectorists found a massive hoard of 2,000-year-old coins in a potato field. Jersey heritage painstakingly excavated. It was the world's biggest discovery of Iron Age coins ever. The archaeologists wanted to find out what treasures lay inside and what it tells us about the British Isles at a time when the Romans
were advancing towards our shores. The hoard was taken to the local museum where conservator Neil Mara and his team began the painstaking task of clearing off the mud. There were an extraordinary 70,000 coins. And more treasure lay hidden within. Unusual coloured beads.
Rather lovely.
And gold and silver bracelets.
This has been much more complicated than expected. We're lifting one piece at a time out, but everything is interlinked and fitted around each other. Haha, success. It's a piece of silver wire, probably from jewellery, just cut up and essentially just scrap metal now.
Who would have cut up this precious metal, and why was it all hidden? As they dig deeper into the hoard looking for clues, they uncover its greatest treasure.
It's heavy. It's heavy.
An amazing collection of thick golden torques, ornate neck rings. Only the most important people in Iron Age society would have worn neck rings of this thickness and weight. After 2,000 years in the ground, it's taken Neil 4 years carefully picking it apart to reveal its contents.
We've now removed 50,000 coins, so we're, we think, 5/7 of the way in. About 20,000 coins left, and you can see there are still a few things outstanding.
With so much of the hoard now revealed, Neil has made some startling revelations.
Well, it's the biggest coin hoard of its kind in the world. We know which tribe actually made it because the coins that have already come off and we've cleaned are of a type we've seen before from the Coriosolite tribe, with a head on one side and a very, very abstract horse on the other.
The Coriosolite were an Iron Age tribe of Celts that inhabited part of what is now Brittany in France. So why did they bury this vast treasure on Jersey? Neil has come into the lab with some of this amazing treasure to tell me. Neil, let's be clear about this. This is an absolutely enormous hoard, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's got the stage now where in this hoard we've got more coins of this period than have been found in France at all.
In the whole of France?
Yeah, and as we've gone through, we found more and more apart from the coins. Torques were the big surprise for us. I mean, this is one of 8 complete ones that we have.
Can I pick that up?
Yeah, please do.
So this is a gold Iron Age neck ring.
Yeah.
How do you get it onto your neck?
They come in 2 halves, so you'd literally give it like a twist like that and then pull apart.
And the pattern is peculiar because it's not facing the observer,
No,
it's kind of facing the wearer.
It would be inside by your throat, yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What about the coins themselves? Do they give us a clue as to the date?
I mean, literally 99.5% of the coins in this hoard date to around sort of 62 BC or before.
They're
Dated.
lovely. Look at that.
They're beautiful faces,
wonderful
aren't
little
they?
face on that side.
We know that those were all made in the run-up to the invasion by Julius Caesar, and so perhaps they knew that Julius Caesar was coming up from the south, defeating, tribe after tribe after tribe, and that they hid their wealth. They actually got it offshore, rowed the thing to Jersey. That we seem to be somewhere that was quite hard to reach, quite hard to land, and so perhaps it was somewhere to hide. And dug it, buried it, with the idea, presumably, of coming back for it later, and were perhaps killed.
The burial of the Jersey hoard reveals the fear that gripped the Celtic tribes as the Romans advanced towards our shores. But conversely, the Thornbury hoard at Bristol Museum dates from a time when, 300 years later, the Romans were in retreat, showing us that the collapse of empire could be equally tumultuous. The Thornbury hoard that's on display upstairs is just a small portion of the 11,460 Roman coins that were discovered. And so I've come down here to the stores to look more closely at some of those coins and find out more about the hoard. How was it discovered?
It was discovered by a man who was digging a fish pond in his back garden. So he found the remains of a pot with over 11,500 coins inside. All of a similar type, all of a similar period.
These coins act as a history of the Roman Empire.
Virtually all the coins are Constantinian, so Constantine, the emperor that's associated with enabling Christianity to be worshipped across the empire.
And found in Constantinople.
And found in Constantinople. So you get two types of coins. So you get one coin in this hoard which hark back to the foundation of Rome.
Ah, that's beautiful. So we've got a little wolf with Romulus and Remus underneath. That's a gorgeous coin. Look at that.
And then there's a female personification of the new empire's capital, which is Constantinople, and that is Constantinopolis.
The coins are also evidence of the empire's decline.
By this time, the coinage has become very debased. There's very little silver content, and virtually everything is made out of copper alloy, and also not quite as well modelled.
So the coins are being literally debased. They are getting smaller. Is this a sign of a crumbling economy then, as Rome goes into decline?
Yes, they're debasing everything.
So where were these minted then? Are they British coins in origin?
None of the ones that I've seen are actually from Britain. We know that because they have little marks on the bottoms of them. We've done a sort of, it's almost like an airline map of where these things have come from, and the furthest one that we've found is Antioch in Turkey, and we've got things from Thessalonica, but also Croatia.
As part of the empire, Roman Britain was connected with diverse people and cultures across Europe and beyond, and this was also a period of relative peace. But when the empire crumbled, it must have been a difficult and even frightening experience for many people. And why on earth was this volume of coins buried?
That's the $64,000 question, because we have no idea.
This was a troubled time, wasn't it? So, I mean, I suppose there are numerous different reasons that somebody could be burying money in the ground.
They could.
They could be trying to hide it. It could be effectively banking it.
And you kept it and you hid it from anybody. You didn't want to have it, and that might be somebody you thought was coming to raid. And clearly we have no idea why nobody collected it.
By the 4th century AD, the Romans were pulling out of Britain, and whoever buried these coins never came back for them. Britain was plunged into a period of uncertainty for the next 600 years, sometimes known as the Dark Ages. Our next excavation provides brand new and very strange clues as to how our ancestors made sense of this upheaval. For archaeologists, burial sites can offer precious clues as to how our ancestors lived and died, but sometimes they also provide us with surprising insights into what seem to us today to be bizarre beliefs and strange rituals long since forgotten. Deep in the Wye Valley in Hereford, a team of archaeologists is on their way to investigate an intriguing discovery near a remote cave.
Day one, the site is up a very, very steep slope, which is densely wooded. On 3 sides of the site, there are 60-foot high vertical cliffs. And immediately above the site, there is the opening of a small cave.
Known locally as Merlin's Cave, in the 1920s an incredible find of prehistoric tools, pottery and bones was made, revealing this to be a sacred burial site for our Neolithic ancestors over 4,500 years ago. But in 2011 a new discovery was made, purely by chance, just below the entrance.
I was doing caving with one of my sons, and
we decided to try and get into this cave, which is about 15 foot up the cliff face. So I left my son sat on what was a tree throw. While I was scaling the cliff here, he discovered flint scraper, a really lovely flint scraper, and some pieces of pottery and some teeth.
Clyde took the finds to the county archaeologist.
The pottery was prehistoric, the teeth were human, and the flint was early Neolithic.
The county archaeologist Tim Hovard was so intrigued by the finds that he organised a dig to see if he could find whether there was a connection between these new finds and the ones in the cave. What he found was even more exciting.
We found 2 human skeletons laid out under 2 of the tree throws. We carbon dated them to about 600 AD.
This was shocking. Tim had expected to find Neolithic skeletons, but these were Dark Age skeletons from the 7th century AD, and they were lying outside a prehistoric burial site. But with such a huge time difference, surely there couldn't be a connection. Then the next piece of evidence emerged.
One of the burials had bones deposited with it, dated to the Bronze Age from the cave, so 12, 13, 1400 years older than the burial.
The prehistoric human bones seem to have been deliberately placed in the later graves. Whoever buried these men clearly knew about the earlier burials inside the cave.
So what we wanted to know was who these people were and why they were involved with the burial in the cave. We know that they were doing something very strange, very different.
Are these 2 men the only ones buried here, or are they part of something much bigger? This year, another dig was organised to find out.
It's a very unusual place to find people being buried. We're on a very steep hillside. The soil isn't very deep. It's actually quite hard to make a grave that's deep enough to bury a body. Now, the reason we've come back here to do further investigations is to try and determine the extent of this burial activity. Do we only have 2 burials, or is it actually a small cemetery?
A trench is dug a short distance from where the 2 burials were found. After 2 days of digging, they start to get results.
We've just found a human bone which is projecting out of the side of the section of the trench. It's a fragment of a large human femur. We're further to the south of where the previous 2 burials are, and it's giving us an idea that the extent of this burial area is considerably larger than we'd seen previously.
More human remains are uncovered.
We've just found this, which is a human tooth. It's actually a human canine, an adult tooth.
And then a little bit of bone, which is just from the path.
Now we're finding remains of other skeletons, including the thigh bone of a newborn child. Now, up to now, all of the bones found from these burials have been of adults. But now we're finding evidence that even very young infants are being buried at this site.
Analysis shows that these date from the same period as the skeletons first found beneath the cave entrance. It's evidence that the team has uncovered the burial ground of a Dark Age community. It's an incredibly strange discovery. Prehistoric burials inside the cave seem to have been so important to this community 2,000 years later that they chose to be buried close to the cave, even though digging graves on this steep ground must have been incredibly difficult. And another discovery is made, evidence that these people are also being buried, along with bones from inside the cave.
Now, on the top of this bone here, we can see encrustation, and this is in fact tufa or stalagmite, which is only formed inside the caves. This bone has come out of a cave. So this provides a direct link between the cave up there and what's being deposited down here.
The team from Manchester University have discovered not only a forgotten burial ground, but a strange funerary ritual that's been lost for 1400 years. I'm interested to find out what the archaeologists think was going on here. So you've got Dark Age burials outside the cave, and then inside the cave there seems to have been a lot of bone, human and animal bone, from much, much earlier. Some period in prehistory.
At least the Neolithic. It's buried with two cow bones.
So this bit here?
Yep.
So a bit of cow rib.
And then there's the knuckle of a cow leg bone by his head that he was buried with as well.
Tim believes there could be a special connection between this particular man and the earlier burials inside the cave. And have you analysed the bones? What are you able to say about this individual?
He is certainly well into his 50s, if not in his early 60s when he died. He was a very tall person, or at least he was well over 6 feet.
We can see that with him lying out here, can't we? I mean, look at those thigh bones.
Yeah. The fact that he is large and robust and lived to a reasonable age would suggest that, if nothing else, he was well fed, which may suggest that he was being looked after.
So who do you think he was?
I think, just with the fact that he's buried with animal bones that must have come from the cave, that he was actually in charge of looking after the contents of the cave for a period of time.
So you're seeing this as a sort of cult centre then?
I think a cult is probably the way to look at it. They're honouring their ancestors, and they're honouring a cave that, as far as they're concerned, has been there for millennia. But at the same time, both burials seem to be laid out in, broadly speaking, a Christian tradition, extended with arms folded over the pelvis.
So in that sense, they're following the Christian tradition, but there is this little bit of prehistoric bone as perhaps an indication that, OK, we're going to do this Christian style, but we'll include something from the past to show that we haven't forgotten about that tradition.
The Dark Ages were a tumultuous period in British history. Anglo-Saxon tribes were invading, and it was a time of great political and religious change, with the establishment of new kingdoms and pagan ideas vying with Christianity for supremacy.
It's highly likely that these weren't Anglo-Saxons. These were actually the native Welsh Britons, if you like, and they're adapting to Christianity as it comes from the south and east and moving up into the west, and they're gradually adapting.
Such a strange sight, and I think it really reminds us we don't expect everybody across England and Wales to be doing exactly the same thing at the same time. The community at Merlin's Cave reached back into their past, combining burial practice with what seems to be an ancestor cult, and perhaps that provided them with much-needed reassurance during such an uncertain period in our history. After the Romans left, Dark Age Britain is often thought of as less civilised and more backward, a time when we lost cultural and trading connections, not only with Rome, but with the world at large. But now a striking new discovery in Tintagel, Cornwall, is challenging this view. Tintagel is best known for its connections with the legendary King Arthur, who, according to myth, was conceived there. Well, this year, archaeologists returned to Tintagel, hoping to investigate its rich Dark Age history and disentangle archaeological fact from Arthurian fiction. The castle remains that you can see on Tintagel today date from the medieval period, but archaeological remains from around 600 AD, found on previous excavations, suggest that there was once a large Dark Age settlement here. In 2016, archaeologists returned to Tintagel to explore areas of the island that had never been dug before. They wanted to find out what kind of settlement it was, but what they found took them all by surprise.
Day one of the Dig Diary, and today we've started excavating on the eastern terrace just here and over behind the castle on the southern terrace. We've opened up 4 trenches, and that's where we're hoping to find what we used to call Dark Age buildings, or buildings that belong to the 5th and 6th century.
The archaeologists from English Heritage and Cornwall Archeological Unit have barely begun to strip off the turf when they make their first discovery.
We've got this possible floor layer of paving.
Evidence for the construction of terraces.
What it looks like is that we have 3 distinct flat terraces with slopes between at the moment, which we hope when we take some material away we'll find some nice walls.
Disappointingly, further digging reveals no traces of buildings.
Maybe there are some terraces which are being used for small enclosures, maybe as cultivation plots rather than for buildings.
But who were these cultivation plots for? On the south side of the island, they make an extraordinary discovery.
We have 3 terraces, this being the substantial wall at the southern end and leading to another wall, presumably for a building, and that leads nicely to a set of steps, and they lead neatly through part of the top building. So we think this is the building, nice level floor and steps up to it.
This is their first big breakthrough. Massive 1 metre thick rock walls are revealed. Never before has such a solid Dark Age building been discovered in Britain.
Substantial build to top and top end.
But what is this building? In their search for clues, they find a rubbish pit next to it.
We've got an animal jawbone here, so you can see the teeth. Something like a wild boar, perhaps.
The remains of boar and other animals may be evidence of a Dark Age feast.
I can see.
And further surprising finds suggest this was a high-status building.
So shallow bowl, nice rim. Put a bit of fruit in or something.
Oh, it's beautiful. It looks like Fassian, which is from Turkey. So that is a beautiful thing.
And Carl Thorpe, the small finds expert, is particularly excited by the discovery of an incredibly rare piece of glass.
Thought you like it.
Oh, that is stunningly beautiful.
Yeah.
That is definitely post-Roman glass. It's even a rim, which is fantastic. And judging from the curvature, I think it is of a little cone cup between the 5th and sort of 7th centuries AD, sort of Merovingian glass originating in France.
Somewhere, yeah. For what? For
most likely drinking wine, and that is just, it's always stunningly beautiful.
The team was simply not expecting to find this many high-quality foreign goods. The people living here were clearly not only very wealthy, but trading over vast distances.
Got a small sherd of what looks to be amphora. That's from the Aegean area, Eastern Mediterranean.
Wow.
So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
By day 12, the team has unearthed the foundations of a building 11 metres long and 4 metres wide. They're convinced that the people who lived here must have had immense wealth and power.
I don't think that anything like this has been found before. So there was some surprised faces, and lo and behold, it's gone on and on. So this might be the style for the whole precinct of buildings on the southern side. Substantial walls will hold up substantial roofs. So, yeah, it's all good. Very exciting.
Further excavations throughout the rest of the summer revealed that this was just part of a large complex covering much of Tintagel. This has astounded the team. They didn't expect to find evidence of such a wealthy and sophisticated community from early Dark Age Britain. So do they really think they've discovered a Dark Age palace? And if so, what was it like to live in it?
We can't be certain that it's a royal site, but whatever it was a high status site because we got so much exotic material.
Yeah, so I mean, we saw some of this material coming out. So tell me about this piece of pottery.
Yes, well, this is very, very finely made. It's probably part of a
thin there.
Yes,
Gosh.
it's probably it's a fine table dish. A complete vessel would be quite large, so you've got this sort of large, expansive, quite shallow bowl, probably for communal feastings. And this is the handle of an amphora sherd, which would have contained wine coming from the Aegean, from Turkey, Marseille, around the coast of Spain. You know,
And this is not actually from Tintagel, is it?
This is a reconstruction of what one of these amphorae from the Aegean, from Greece, might have looked like. But this would be for carrying wine, probably, but could also be for olive oil. We don't know, but...
And the archaeology that you're looking at here, of course, dates to a really interesting time. We're looking at Britain after the collapse of the Roman Empire. We're looking at independent states.
Yeah, I mean, Britain does break into lots of little states, like Mercia and Wessex and Kent and places, and Cornwall carries on in its own way. And this may well be a royal centre with connections far afield.
See, I'm starting to go on flights of fancy now, and to me, this is the royal apartments of the palace at Tintagel.
Yeah.
This is where King Arthur lived.
Well, it has got that extraordinary association from when Geoffrey of Monmouth writes about the history of the kings of Britain in the 12th century. He says that Arthur was conceived at Tintagel.
Yeah.
What, did he invent this? Had he pulled it out of various other legends? We really don't know.
Although they may not have found evidence of King Arthur himself, the team have discovered that Dark Age Tintagel was a prosperous centre of trade and perhaps even a seat of royalty, a bastion against the turmoil that was engulfing Britain at this time. In the past, infant mortality rates were much, much higher than they are today. In the Dark Ages, it's thought that perhaps half of all children didn't make it to adulthood. And yet, when you look at cemeteries from the period, there just don't seem to be enough juvenile and infant burials. So were the burial rites for children different to those for adults? It's certainly possible. And archaeologists in South Wales have been making some intriguing discoveries. In the winter of 2014, record storms battered South Wales. They were so ferocious that they eroded the Pembrokeshire coastline. And human bones started to appear as the sand dunes were stripped back, revealing an ancient cemetery. These skeletons may contain precious clues about our past. So for the last 3 years, a team from Dyfed Archaeology has been trying to save what they can from this now dangerously exposed site.
This is classic rescue archaeology. Absolutely, you can see here that the threat is obvious and happening, and we're just dealing with it.
It's day 3 of this year's dig, and they are beginning to excavate the Dark Age layers from the 7th to the 9th centuries AD. One burial emerges that is incredibly unusual and entirely different to anything they've seen so far.
So it seems to be a woman buried with a baby in the crook of her arms.
That's right.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's the baby's head, yeah.
Skull there, pelvis in this area.
Okay.
Here's the mother's left arm.
Finding an infant burial from this time is extremely rare. Tiny bones tend to decompose quickly in many cemeteries. But here, the infant bones are perfectly preserved by the coastal sand.
Ken, do you want to tell me what you're drawing?
It's a kiss grave containing the remains of what looks like an infant.
An infant's kiss grave.
Newborn, probably. Or
Yeah.
even a perinatal, very small child. You can see from the length of it.
Yeah.
And incredibly, other infant burials soon begin to emerge.
It It's rare to find this quantity of infants in a communal cemetery. It doesn't matter what date it's from, they are rare to find. Here we've got a large number of them because the preservation in the sand has been so good for skeletal remains.
By week 3, they've found an incredible 20 infant graves, a sobering reminder of infant mortality rates at this time, and an intimate insight into how parents felt about losing so many young children at such an early age, 1400 years ago.
So what we've got here is a really rather nice bone pin, possibly a shroud pin. And some of the burials that we've had here, you can see from the position of the skeleton, the feet particularly, that these people look like they were wrapped in shrouds when they were buried. There was one absolutely tiny little infant. I actually excavated it myself. Its legs were actually crossed at the ankles, so again it suggests it was wrapped before being placed in the ground.
This pin would have been used to carefully secure the shroud around this dead child before it was placed in its grave. And out of the sand comes an intriguing series of finds.
This is one of a number of areas where we've had white quartz pebbles across the site, but they've been the graves of infants, so the pebbles have been really carefully placed. We had one with over 100 pebbles on the top of it, densely packed, and obviously a lot of care invested in the grave of the baby inside.
So what did these quartz pebbles signify? Dig co-director Marion Shiner and osteologist Katie Hemmer have come into the lab to tell me about their discoveries and what they tell us about the attitude of Dark Age parents to the deaths of their children.
We don't know the purpose of the quartz pebbles. They're found in mortuary contexts from the prehistoric period onward, and they're found at other early medieval Welsh cemeteries. There's a passage in the Bible, in Revelation, which talks about the person who has found Christ being given a white stone, and in that a new name. There is evidence that in the later medieval period, each mourner at a funeral brought a stone or took a stone and put it on top of the grave, but you know, there must have been over 130 people at the funeral of that child, if that's what this is signifying, and they are only on the children's graves.
And they're burying very, very tiny children, well, infants.
Yes, it's the thing that really strikes you about the site is the level of care that a lot of these infants and young children were buried with.
Absolutely, I think we have to move away from old notions that people didn't care for their children at this time. They are investing the same amount of effort, if not more, into the burials of the really youngest members of this population.
Discoveries like this show how archaeology can change the story of Britain. From revealing lost religious practices of the Dark Ages and turning on its head our view about how prepared our soldiers were when sent to fight on the Western Front, to the unique discovery on Salisbury Plain that shows the ritual landscape of Stonehenge was bigger than we'd ever imagined. Our ancestors made the country we live in today. And through archaeology, we've been able to reach back through the centuries and touch their lives.